The chapel doors stood open like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. Eliza Thornbridge heard the vows before she saw them, her sister's voice trembling with stolen joy, and his, steady as ever, promising forever to the wrong woman. She'd waited 7 years for him, 7 years of letters, of patience, of being told she was the one. Now she stood in the doorway, uninvited, watching her entire life collapse into a lie. The guests turned. Whispers erupted. And in that moment, Eliza understood. She would either shatter here or disappear and become someone they could never break again. If you want to see how far betrayal can push a woman and how high she can rise from the ashes, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The morning had started with hope. Eliza remembered that clearly, even as everything else blurred into nightmare. She'd woken early, the kind of early where the sky still held onto darkness, and dressed in her best traveling gown, the deep green one, with the ivory lace collar that made her eyes look brighter. She'd packed a small bag, just enough for a few days because Margaret had written to say she was ill. Margaret, her younger sister, alone in that drafty townhouse in Bath, needing her. "Come quickly," the letter had said. "I'm frightened." So Eliza had gone. Of course she had. That's what older sisters did. The journey from London had taken most of the day, the coach rattling over uneven roads until her bones ached. She'd arrived at sunset, the sky streaked with orange and pink, beautiful in a way that felt almost mocking now. The townhouse had been quiet when she approached. Too quiet. She'd raised her hand to knock, but the door had been ajar. That should have been the first warning. Inside, the house hadn't looked ill-kept or abandoned. Candles were lit. Fresh flowers sat in vases. Voices drifted from somewhere deeper in the house. Low, intimate, punctuated by soft laughter. Eliza had followed the sound, her stomach beginning to knot with something she couldn't yet name. The voices had led her to a small private chapel attached to the east wing of the house. She'd never known it existed, and there, through the half-open doors, she saw them. Margaret wore white. Not the white of illness, but the white of bridal silk, the kind that cost a fortune and took months to prepare. Her dark hair was pinned with pearls. Her face glowed with happiness so pure it looked obscene. Beside her stood Edmund Fairfax, Eliza's Edmund, the man she'd been engaged to, not officially perhaps, but in every way that mattered, for 7 years. The man who'd written her letters filled with promises, who'd spoken of their future together in hushed, reverent tones. The man who'd kissed her once under a willow tree by the river and told her she was the only woman he'd ever love. He was holding Margaret's hand. A minister stood before them, Bible open, voice droning through words Eliza had once dreamed of hearing spoken over her own union. "Do you, Edmund Charles Fairfax, take this woman?" Eliza's breath caught, audible in the silence. The minister stopped. Margaret turned first, her face going pale, then flushed. Edmund followed, his expression flickering through surprise, guilt, and finally something worse, irritation. "Eliza," he said, as if her name were an inconvenience. "What are you doing here?" She couldn't speak. Her mouth had forgotten how. Margaret stepped forward, her bridal train whispering against the stone floor. "Eliza, we were going to tell you after." "After?" The word came out cracked, barely audible. "After the ceremony." Margaret's hands twisted together, and for a moment she looked almost sorry. Almost. "We didn't want to hurt you." The chapel seemed to tilt. Eliza gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white. "You wrote that you were ill," she said slowly, trying to understand. "You asked me to come." Margaret's eyes darted to Edmund, then back. "I knew you wouldn't come otherwise, and we needed you to know, eventually. But Edmund said it would be easier if it was already done." Easier. The word hung in the air like poison. Edmund cleared his throat, stepping forward with that same calm authority he'd always carried. "Eliza, this is awkward, I grant you, but surely you can see—" "See what?" Her voice was still too quiet, too controlled. She could feel something building inside her, something dangerous, but it hadn't broken through yet. "What exactly should I see, Edmund?" "That things change," he said simply. "Circumstances evolve. Margaret and we've grown close over the past months. What we have is what you have." She finally found her volume, the words sharp enough to cut. What about what we had? 7 years, Edmund. 7 years of waiting, of patience, of you telling me. She stopped, her throat closing. I never proposed, Edmund said, and there was an edge to his voice now, defensive. We were never formally engaged, Eliza. You must have misunderstood the nature of our understanding. The floor seemed to drop away beneath her. Misunderstood, she repeated, the word tasting like ash. Edmund's situation changed, Margaret said quickly, her voice taking on a pleading tone. When his uncle died and left him the estate, he needed... We both realized that certain partnerships make more sense than others. His family has expectations, financial considerations. I know this must be difficult for you to hear, but what? Eliza's voice was rising now, shaking. But you decided to take him? To lie to me? To trick me into coming here so I could watch? No one tricked you, Edmund cut in, his patience visibly thinning. You inserted yourself into this situation. Margaret asked you to come because she felt you deserved to know, not because I deserve better than this. The words burst out of her, echoing off the stone walls. I gave you everything. My time, my reputation, my... She broke off, unable to finish. A few guests had gathered behind her now, drawn by the commotion. She could feel their eyes on her back, hungry for scandal. Margaret's expression shifted, the almost apology fading into something colder. You gave him nothing but expectations and pressure, she said quietly. You waited and waited, never moving forward, never taking action. You just expected him to come back from his travels and marry you because you'd been patient enough. But patience isn't love, Eliza. It's just waiting. The words hit like a slap. Hit. And what you're doing is love? Eliza heard the break in her own voice, hated herself for it. Stealing your sister's... He was never yours to steal. Margaret's composure cracked, her voice sharp. You never even had a formal engagement. You've been living in a fantasy for years, and everyone knew it except you. The chapel had gone completely silent. Even the minister looked uncomfortable, clutching his Bible like a shield. Edmund stepped between them, his jaw tight. This is becoming unseemly. Eliza, I think it's best if you leave. Leave? She stared at him, at this man she'd thought she knew, and saw a stranger. You want me to leave so you can marry my sister in peace? Yes, he said simply. That would be preferable. Something in her chest snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet final severing of whatever had connected her to this moment, to these people, to the life she'd thought she was building. Fine, she said, and her voice was suddenly calm, eerily steady. Proceed. Margaret blinked. What? I said proceed. Eliza straightened, her hands falling to her sides. Go ahead, get married. I won't stop you. Edmund frowned, suspicious. Eliza, what did you think I was going to do? She looked between them, something hard forming in her expression. Make a scene? Beg? Throw myself at your feet and plead for you to reconsider? She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. No, if this is what you both want, then have it. I won't stand in your way. She turned to leave, but Margaret's voice stopped her. Eliza, please. I don't want us to part like this. You're my sister. Eliza looked back over her shoulder. The candlelight cast Margaret's face in shadow, making her look like a stranger. No, Eliza said softly. I was your sister. I don't know what you are now. She walked out of the chapel, through the townhouse, and into the cool evening air. Behind her, she heard the ceremony resume, the minister's voice picking up where it had left off, as if she'd never been there at all. The coach she'd arrived in was still waiting, the driver dozing on his bench. She climbed inside without a word, pulled the curtain shut, and sat in the darkness as the wheels began to turn. She didn't cry. She couldn't. The tears were there, pressing behind her eyes like a flood against a dam, but she wouldn't let them fall. Not yet. Not where anyone might see. The journey back to London took all night. Eliza sat rigid in her seat, watching the dark countryside roll past through the gap in the curtain. Every bump in the road jolted through her, physical pain to match the other kind. By the time dawn broke over the city, she'd made her decision. She wouldn't go home. Not to her family's townhouse in Mayfair, where her mother would cluck sympathetically while secretly relieved that the family scandal was over, where her father would bluster about Edmund's honor while doing nothing. Not where cousins and aunts would descend with pity-soaked advice and thinly veiled judgment. Instead, she directed the driver to a small boarding house near Bloomsbury, the kind of place where widows and spinsters lived quiet, anonymous lives. She paid for a week in advance, climbed 3 flights of narrow stairs to a cramped room that smelled of lavender and old wood, and finally allowed herself to break. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen shut. She cried until there was nothing left inside her but hollow exhaustion. And when she was done, when the tears had dried into salt tracks on her cheeks, she lay on the thin mattress and stared at the water-stained ceiling and thought about what came next. The scandal would be everywhere by now. News traveled fast in their circles, and something like this, a jilted almost fiancé discovering her sister's secret wedding, was too delicious to keep quiet. She could already imagine the whispers in drawing rooms, the carefully composed expressions of false sympathy, the real glee beneath it all. Poor Eliza Thornbridge, 7 years wasted, and her own sister. Can you imagine? She'd be the object of pity and gossip for months, maybe years. Every social event would be torture, every encounter a reminder of her humiliation. Men would avoid her, not wanting the complication of a woman with such a public failure attached to her name. Other women would either pity or despise her, depending on their temperament, unless she disappeared. The thought came quietly, but once it arrived, it wouldn't leave. What if she simply left? Not forever, perhaps, but long enough to let the scandal fade, to let people forget, to become someone they couldn't define by this moment. She had an aunt who lived in Devon, in a crumbling estate far from any society that mattered. Aunt Catherine had always been eccentric, preferring books and solitude to parties and people. She'd extended an open invitation years ago, one Eliza had never taken seriously. Until now. By the time the sun was fully up, Eliza had written the letter. By noon, she'd packed what few belongings she'd brought with her. By evening, she was on another coach, this one heading west, away from London, away from the life she'd known, toward something she couldn't yet name. The journey took 3 days. Eliza spent them in a strange, numb state, neither fully present nor entirely absent. She ate when food was offered, slept when exhaustion forced her, and otherwise stared out at the changing landscape with hollow eyes. England in October was a study in decay. The trees had lost most of their leaves, leaving skeletal branches against gray skies. The fields lay harvested and bare. Everything looked stripped down, exposed, waiting for winter. She felt a kinship with it. Aunt Catherine's estate appeared on the afternoon of the 3rd day, emerging from a thick fog like something from a Gothic novel. The house was large but dilapidated, its once grand facade now mottled with ivy and crumbling stone. The grounds were overgrown, wild in a way that suggested years of neglect. It was perfect. The coach rolled to a stop in the circular drive, and Eliza stepped down onto gravel choked with weeds. Before she could knock, the front door swung open to reveal a tall, angular woman in her 60s, dressed in a faded riding habit and muddy boots. "So you finally decided to take me up on it," Aunt Catherine said without preamble. "About time. You look terrible. Come inside before you catch your death." The interior of the house matched the exterior, grand bones beneath layers of dust and disrepair. Sheets covered most of the furniture. Portraits of long-dead Thornbridges stared down from walls in need of fresh paint. The whole place smelled of damp and old books. "I wasn't expecting company," Aunt Catherine said, leading her through dim hallways. "I don't keep much staff. Just Mrs. Hewitt, who cooks and cleans badly but means well, and Tom, who does the heavy work when he remembers. You'll have to fend for yourself mostly. Does that bother you?" "No," Eliza said, and realized she meant it. "Good." Catherine pushed open a door to a bedroom that was in slightly better condition than the rest of the house. "This was your mother's room before she married. I've kept it aired out, more or less. You can stay as long as you like. I won't pry, but I'm not blind. You're here because something broke you. That's fine. This is a good place for broken things." She left without waiting for a response, her boots echoing down the hall. Eliza stood in the doorway of her mother's girlhood room and felt something shift inside her. Not healing, it was too soon for that, but a kind of settling, like debris finding the bottom of a river. She would stay here. She would hide here. And maybe, eventually, she would figure out who she was when she wasn't waiting for Edmund Fairfax to make her complete. The first weeks were the hardest. Eliza moved through Aunt Catherine's house like a ghost, speaking only when spoken to, eating little, sleeping less. She spent hours in the library, a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and windows that looked out over the wild gardens. Most of the books were old, leather-bound, smelling of mildew and forgotten knowledge. She read voraciously, desperately, anything to keep her mind occupied. Philosophy, history, poetry, novels she'd never been allowed to read because they were considered too scandalous or too serious for young ladies. She absorbed it all, hungry for something to fill the hollow space inside her. Aunt Catherine left her alone mostly, but occasionally appeared with terse observations. "You're wasting away. Eat something." "Fresh air does wonders. Try going outside. Sitting in the dark won't solve anything. Light a candle at least." It was mid-November when Eliza finally ventured beyond the house. She woke one morning to find frost coating the windows, turning them into crystalline works of art. Something about the beauty of it, cold and sharp and impersonal, drew her outside. The gardens were even more overgrown than she'd realized. Paths had disappeared beneath weeds and fallen leaves. The ornamental hedges had grown into wild, shapeless masses. A fountain in the center courtyard stood dry and choked with debris. She walked until she reached the edge of the property, where a low stone wall separated the estate from open countryside. Rolling hills stretched to the horizon, empty and vast under a pale sky. For the first time since the chapel, Eliza felt like she could breathe. She started walking the grounds every day after that, rain or shine. At first, she just wandered aimlessly, learning the layout, discovering forgotten corners. A collapsed gazebo, an old stable, a walled kitchen garden that had gone completely to seed. Then she started clearing paths. It began almost without thought. She was walking and came across a section of the main path blocked by fallen branches. She moved them. The next day she brought shears and trimmed back the worst of the overgrowth. The day after that, she recruited Tom to help her clear an entire section. "Miss Thornbridge wants to do what now?" Mrs. Hewitt had asked, bewildered. "Work," Eliza had said simply. "In the garden." "That's manual labor, miss, not fitting for—" "I don't care what's fitting." And she didn't. That was the strangest part. All her life she'd cared desperately about what was fitting, what was proper, what was expected. She'd shaped herself to meet those expectations, trimming away anything that didn't fit the mold of what a respectable young lady should be. Where had that gotten her? So she worked in the garden, ruining her hands and her dresses and not caring. She worked until her back ached and her muscles burned. She worked until she was too exhausted to think about Edmund or Margaret or any of it. Aunt Catherine found her one afternoon, covered in dirt, wrestling with an overgrown rosebush. "You're attacking that plant like it owes you money," Catherine observed. Eliza sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. "It's stubborn." "So are you, apparently." Catherine studied her for a long moment. "You look different than when you arrived." "I look like a mess." "You look alive. There's a difference." Catherine paused. "Whatever happened to you in London, whoever happened to you, they don't get to kill you, not unless you let them." Eliza stared at the rosebush, at her scraped and bleeding hands, at the pile of thorny branches she'd cut away. "I let myself die for 7 years," she said quietly, "waiting for someone who was never coming. I don't want to do that anymore." "Then don't." Catherine walked away, leaving Eliza alone with the stubborn rosebush and her stubborn determination. She wrestled it into submission by sunset. Winter came hard that year. Snow fell in thick blankets, turning the estate into something from a fairy tale. Eliza kept working, though the work changed. She helped Mrs. Hewitt with preserves and mending. She learned to manage the household accounts, discovering that her aunt's finances were in even worse shape than the house. She read more, learned more, thought more, and slowly, painfully, she began to rebuild herself. Not into what she'd been before. That version of Eliza was gone, left behind in a chapel watching her life collapse, but into something new, something harder and clearer and entirely her own. She practiced saying no, just to herself at first, in the mirror in her room. "No, I won't wait anymore. No, I won't shape myself to please you. No, I won't accept less than I deserve." The words felt foreign in her mouth, almost obscene, but she kept saying them until they felt natural. Christmas came and went without ceremony. Eliza received a single letter, forwarded from London. It was from her mother, brief and cold, informing her that Margaret and Edmund had settled into married life quite nicely, and that the family would appreciate it if Eliza would stop sulking in the countryside and return to face society with dignity. Eliza burned the letter in the fireplace and didn't respond. January brought a thaw, then more snow, then finally, in late February, the first hints of spring. Crocuses pushed through the frozen ground. The bare trees began to bud. The world was slowly coming back to life. Eliza stood at the edge of the property one morning, watching the sunrise paint the hills in shades of gold and pink, and realized she'd stopped thinking about Edmund every hour, every day, even. That he'd become something that happened to her rather than something that defined her. "You're planning to go back," Aunt Catherine said, appearing beside her with her usual uncanny timing. "Eventually," Eliza admitted. "I can't hide forever." "Not hiding, preparing." Catherine handed her a cup of tea, steam rising in the cold air. "There's a difference between running away and taking time to sharpen your weapons." "What weapons?" "Yourself." Catherine sipped her tea. "You came here broken. You're leaving whole. That's the most dangerous thing a woman can be in our world." Eliza considered this. "Will they even remember me?" "Oh, they'll remember. But you won't be who they remember. That's your advantage." Catherine smiled, a sharp expression that reminded Eliza they shared blood. "Use it." By April, the estate looked transformed. The gardens weren't pristine, but they were ordered, maintained, beautiful in a wild way. The house had been cleaned, at least the parts that were livable. Aunt Catherine's accounts were organized, her finances stabilized. And Eliza was ready. She stood in front of the mirror in her mother's old room, her room now, and studied her reflection. She'd lost weight, her face sharper, more angular. Her skin had lost its fashionable pallor, tanned from months of outdoor work. Her hands were scarred and calloused. Her eyes were different too, harder, more watchful. She looked nothing like the girl who'd stood in that chapel doorway 7 months ago. Good. The letter to her mother was brief. "I'm returning to London for the season. Please have my rooms prepared." The response came faster than expected. "It's about time. We have much to discuss." Eliza left Devon on a morning bright with spring rain. Aunt Catherine stood on the crumbling steps, watching her go. "Don't let them make you small again," Catherine said. "I won't," Eliza promised. "And if you need to escape again, I know where to find you." The journey back felt entirely different from the journey away. Eliza sat upright in the coach, watching the landscape change, feeling no fear, no dread. Only a cold, clear certainty. They'd broken her once. They wouldn't get the chance again. London appeared through the coach window like a beast waking from sleep, crowded, loud, filthy, magnificent. Eliza felt her pulse quicken, but not with anxiety, with something closer to anticipation. The Thornbridge townhouse in Mayfair looked exactly as she'd left it. Same glossy black door, same pristine windows, same sense of carefully maintained respectability. She stood on the pavement for a moment, her traveling bag in hand, and took a deep breath. Then she walked up the steps and knocked on her own front door. The butler, Henderson, opened it and nearly dropped his composure entirely. "Miss Eliza," he managed, that is, your mother is expecting you, but I look different?" Eliza finished calmly. "Yes, I imagine I do. Is she receiving?" "In the morning room, miss." Eliza handed him her bag and gloves and walked through the familiar halls with unfamiliar confidence. The house smelled of beeswax and roses, exactly as it always had. Nothing had changed here. But she had. Her mother sat by the window, embroidery in her lap, the picture of domestic refinement. She looked up as Eliza entered, and her expression went through several rapid transformations. Surprise, assessment, displeasure. "Eliza," she said carefully, "you've changed." "Hello, Mother. Your complexion is quite ruined, and you've lost weight. Not in a flattering way." "I've been working," Eliza said, sitting without being invited. "Working?" Her mother made it sound obscene. "At what precisely?" "Various things. Manual labor, mostly. Gardening, accounting, learning to manage an estate." Her mother's lips thinned. "How very rustic. I suppose Catherine encouraged this?" "She didn't discourage it." A long silence stretched between them, filled with everything they weren't saying. Finally, her mother set down her embroidery. I assume you've heard that Margaret is with child. Something twisted in Eliza's gut, but her expression didn't change. No, I hadn't heard. Congratulations to her. They're quite happy, her mother continued, watching her carefully. Edmund has been very attentive. They've been invited to several important events this season. The scandal has largely died down. How convenient. For them, yes. Her mother leaned forward slightly. Eliza, I understand you were hurt. Hurt? The word came out sharp. Is that what we're calling it? But it's time to move forward. You're 6 and 20 now. Your prospects were never exceptional, and after everything, they've diminished considerably. However, there are still options. Mr. Gerald Pemberton has expressed interest, and while he's significantly older and his estate is modest, he seems willing to overlook— No. Her mother blinked. Excuse me? I said no, I'm not interested in Mr. Pemberton or anyone else you've lined up. Eliza, be reasonable. You can't simply— I can, Eliza interrupted, her voice calm but immovable. I will. I'm not here to find a husband, Mother. I'm here to reclaim my life. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Eliza stood, smoothing her travel-wrinkled skirt. I haven't decided yet, but I'll let you know when I figure it out. She left her mother sputtering in the morning room and climbed the stairs to her old bedroom. It had been maintained in her absence, everything exactly where she'd left it. Her dresses hung in the wardrobe, her books sat on their shelves, her jewelry glittered in its case. It all felt like it belonged to someone else. She walked to the window and looked out over Mayfair's elegant streets, at the carefully maintained facades, and the people moving through their carefully maintained lives. Somewhere in this city, Margaret and Edmund were building their life together. Their happy, respectable, stolen life. Eliza felt nothing. No rage, no grief, no longing. Just a cool, distant curiosity about what came next. She'd survived the shattering. She'd rebuilt herself in the aftermath. Now she needed to figure out what this new version of herself was meant to do. The answer would come in time. For now, she had a season to navigate and a society to face, and she would do it on her own terms, or not at all. The first event came 3 days after her arrival. Lady Pemberton's annual spring ball, one of those obligatory gatherings where everyone who mattered would be crammed into overheated rooms, pretending to enjoy themselves while actually calculating social positions and marriage prospects. Eliza's mother had secured them an invitation months ago, back when she still thought Eliza might be salvaged into respectability. You don't have to go, her mother said that morning, though her tone suggested otherwise. Given the circumstances, no one would fault you for— I'm going, Eliza said, buttoning her gloves with steady hands. Her mother looked uncertain, a rare expression on her usually composed face. People will talk. They'll stare. Margaret and Edmund will be there, and— Good. Let them stare. The dress she'd chosen was deliberate. Not the pastels expected of unmarried women her age, but a deep burgundy silk that made her look older, more severe. The neckline was modest, the sleeves long, the overall effect one of control rather than charm. She'd pinned her hair back severely, with none of the soft curls that had once framed her face. She looked nothing like the girl who'd been jilted. She looked like someone who'd survived it. The ballroom blazed with candlelight when they arrived, already packed with London's finest. The orchestra played something bright and meaningless. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings. Everyone was performing happiness with varying degrees of success. Eliza felt the moment the room noticed her. It wasn't obvious. No one stopped mid-sentence or dropped their champagne, but there was a ripple, a subtle shift in attention, like a predator catching a scent. Conversations continued, but eyes tracked her movement across the threshold. She kept her head high, and her expression neutral. Miss Thornbridge, Lady Pemberton materialized beside them with the speed of someone who'd been watching the door. How delightful to see you, and looking so— well. We'd heard you were in the country. I was, Eliza said simply. And now you're back. Lady Pemberton's smile was all teeth. How brave of you, after everything. After what precisely? The older woman's smile faltered slightly. Oh well, you know, the situation with your sister and Mr. Fairfax. Such an unexpected turn of events. Life is full of those, Eliza said, her tone pleasant but flat. If you'll excuse me. She moved deeper into the ballroom before Lady Pemberton could respond. her mother trailing behind with a mixture of horror and grudging admiration. "Eliza," her mother hissed, "you cannot be rude to—" "I wasn't rude, I was honest. There's a difference." They found a relatively quiet corner near one of the large windows. Eliza accepted a glass of champagne from a passing servant and surveyed the room with the detachment of a general studying a battlefield. There were the usual clusters, young women giggling near the dance floor, older matrons gossiping by the refreshment tables, men congregating near the card rooms, couples in various stages of courtship or marriage circulating through it all. And there, near the center of the room, holding court like minor royalty, were Margaret and Edmund. Margaret wore pale blue, her figure already showing the subtle roundness of early pregnancy. She looked radiant, glowing with that particular smugness of a woman who'd won. Edmund stood beside her, one hand possessively on her lower back, looking exactly as he always had, handsome, confident, utterly comfortable in his place in the world. They hadn't seen her yet. Eliza watched them for a long moment, waiting to feel something. Anger, grief, longing, anything. But there was only that same cool detachment, like watching strangers play out a scene that had nothing to do with her. "Eliza Thornbridge." The voice came from her left, male, unfamiliar. "I'd heard you were back in town." She turned to find a man she didn't recognize studying her with open curiosity. He was tall, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair and darker eyes. His clothes were expensive, but worn with casual disregard, as if he couldn't be bothered to care about fashion. There was something unsettling about his gaze, too direct, too intelligent. "You have me at a disadvantage," she said carefully. "You know my name, but I don't know yours. Lucien Varick." He said it like it should mean something. When her expression didn't change, his mouth quirked slightly. "Ah, you've been out of circulation. My father died last year. I inherited his title and his debts in equal measure. Now I'm the Earl of Ashford, which means people invite me to these things and pretend my family's ruin isn't common knowledge." His bluntness was startling. "That's remarkably honest. Life's too short for performance," he said, taking a glass of champagne from a passing tray. "Though I seem to be in the minority on that opinion, particularly in rooms like this." Despite herself, Eliza felt her mouth twitch toward a smile. "You don't enjoy society events?" "I find them tedious, everyone saying what they don't mean, meaning what they don't say, dancing around the truth like it's something obscene." He studied her over the rim of his glass. "You're different than I expected." "You had expectations?" "Everyone's been talking about you. The jilted sister, back from exile. They're waiting to see if you'll fall apart in public or do something scandalous." He paused. "I'm betting on scandalous. You don't even know me." "No, but I know that look, the one you're wearing right now." His voice dropped slightly. "It's the look of someone who's stopped caring about the rules." Before Eliza could respond, a commotion near the center of the room caught their attention. Margaret had spotted her. Her face went pale, then flushed, her hand tightening on Edmund's arm. She said something Eliza couldn't hear, and Edmund's head snapped around, his eyes finding her across the crowded room. For a moment, no one moved. Then Margaret started toward her, Edmund following, and the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. "This should be interesting," Lucien murmured. "Want me to disappear?" "No," Eliza said, surprised to find she meant it. "Stay." Margaret stopped a few feet away, her expression caught between guilt and defiance. Up close, the pregnancy was more obvious, not just in her figure, but in the way she moved, the protective curve of her hand over her stomach. "Eliza," she said, her voice too bright. "You're back. We didn't know. Mother didn't tell us you'd returned." "Didn't she?" Eliza kept her voice neutral. "How remiss of her." Edmund stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Margaret has been worried about you. We both have." "Have you?" Eliza looked between them, these two people who'd shaped so much of her pain, and felt nothing but a vague curiosity about how they'd play this scene. "How thoughtful." "You disappeared for months," Margaret continued, her voice taking on a pleading edge. "No one knew where you were. We thought—" "What? That I'd thrown myself into a river somewhere?" Eliza's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "Sorry to disappoint." "That's not fair," Edmund said, his voice low. "We never wanted—" "What did you want, Edmund?" Eliza turned her full attention to him for the first time. When you decided to marry my sister in secret, when you had her trick me into witnessing it, what exactly did you want from me? Around them, conversations had stopped entirely. Everyone was listening now, even those pretending not to. Edmund's face darkened. This isn't the place. No? Then where would be appropriate? Should I have made an appointment? Sent a formal request for clarification? Eliza felt something rising in her chest, sharp and liberating. You took 7 years of my life. You let me believe we had an understanding. And when you decided otherwise, you didn't even have the courage to tell me yourself. We were never formally engaged, Edmund said through clenched teeth. You knew that. I knew you were a coward, Eliza said, and heard several gasps around her. I just didn't realize how much of one until I watched you hide behind my sister while she did your dirty work. Eliza! Her mother appeared like a ghost, face white with horror. Please, you're making a scene. Am I? Good. Someone should. Eliza turned back to Margaret, who looked near tears. Did he tell you the things he told me? The promises? Or did he save those for someone he thought would wait forever? He loves me, Margaret said, but her voice wavered. What we have is real. Maybe it is, Eliza agreed calmly. Maybe you're exactly what he wanted. Younger, prettier, more compliant. Maybe I should thank you for taking him off my hands before I wasted another 7 years. She paused. Or maybe you should ask yourself what happens when someone even younger and prettier comes along. After all, promises don't seem to mean much to him. That's enough, Edmund snapped, grabbing Margaret's arm. Come on, we don't have to listen to this. They fled toward the terrace. Margaret's face crumpled, Edmund's rigid with anger. The crowd parted for them like water, then immediately closed in with excited whispers. Eliza stood in the center of the storm she'd created, her heart pounding, her hands shaking slightly, and felt more alive than she had in months. That, Lucian said from beside her, was spectacular. That was social suicide, her mother whispered, looking faint. Maybe, Eliza said. But I feel better. Her mother fled, probably to do damage control. The crowd around them was buzzing, faces turned toward her with a mixture of shock, admiration, and greedy anticipation of more drama. Eliza finished her champagne and set the glass down with deliberate care. Dance with me, Lucian said suddenly. She blinked at him. What? Dance. Now, before they eat you alive. He offered his hand. Trust me, I've been devoured by this particular pack before. It's easier if you give them something else to focus on. She shouldn't. She'd already caused enough scandal for one evening, but something about his directness, his complete lack of pretense, made her trust him. She took his hand. The orchestra was playing a waltz. Lucian led her onto the floor with practiced ease, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers with surprising gentleness. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the slight scar along his jawline, the way his mouth curved naturally toward cynicism. Everyone's watching, she said quietly. Let them. They were going to watch anyway. He spun her smoothly through a turn. At least now they're watching you move forward instead of fall apart. You sound like you speak from experience. I told you my family's ruin is common knowledge. When my father died, he left debts that would have crushed 3 estates. I've spent the last year selling everything that wasn't entailed, dismissing staff, watching people who called themselves friends suddenly remember prior engagements. His voice was matter-of-fact, but she heard the edge beneath it. Society loves a scandal, but they hate someone who refuses to perform shame properly. And have you? Performed shame? Not once. It infuriates them. He smiled, sharp and genuine. You're going to do the same thing, aren't you? Refuse to be what they expect. I don't know what I'm going to do, Eliza admitted. I just know I can't go back to being who I was. Good. That person sounds boring. Despite everything, she laughed. You don't even know me. I know you just told your former almost fiancé exactly what you thought of him in front of 200 people. I know you're dancing with a social pariah instead of hiding in the retiring room. I know you're either incredibly brave or completely reckless. He paused. Possibly both. What if I'm just angry? Anger's useful. It's better than grief. The waltz was ending, but he didn't immediately release her. The question is, what are you going to do with it? I don't know yet.
When you figure it out, Lucian said, stepping back and bowing with exaggerated formality, I'd like to hear about it. I find you interesting, Eliza Thornbridge. That's rare. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the crowd with the same casual disregard he'd shown for everything else. Eliza stood on the edge of the dance floor, catching her breath, aware of the eyes still on her. She could see her mother in the corner, being comforted by other matrons. She could see Edmund and Margaret on the terrace, his head bent close to hers in what looked like urgent conversation. She could see dozens of other faces, all watching, all judging, all trying to fit her into a category that made sense. She didn't fit anywhere anymore. And for the first time in her life, she didn't care. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of whispered conversations and pointed looks. Several people approached her with thinly veiled attempts to extract more gossip. A few sympathetic souls offered their support, though she could see the calculation behind their eyes. No one danced with her again. She left early, her mother following in stiff-backed silence. The coach ride home was excruciating. Her mother sat across from her, face tight with barely controlled fury. That was the most humiliating display I've ever witnessed, she finally said. Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes, Eliza said calmly. I told the truth. You destroyed your reputation. Whatever slim chances you had left for a decent marriage. I don't want a decent marriage, Eliza interrupted. I don't want any marriage at all, if it means spending the rest of my life being someone's second choice. You're being ridiculous. Every woman must marry. It's the natural order. Then perhaps the natural order is wrong. Her mother stared at her as if she'd sprouted horns. You cannot be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. Eliza leaned forward slightly. I spent 7 years waiting for a man who didn't want me. I spent 7 months rebuilding myself into someone who doesn't need anyone's validation. I'm not going back to being powerless. You're a woman. You have no power except what a husband provides. Then I'll find another kind of power. There is no other kind. Her mother's voice rose, frustrated. Eliza, please, be reasonable. Apologize to Margaret and Edmund. Make amends. Find some respectable man willing to overlook tonight's disaster and accept his proposal. This rebellion of yours isn't a rebellion, Eliza finished. It's a refusal to cooperate with my own erasure. The coach stopped in front of their townhouse. Eliza stepped out without waiting for help, leaving her mother sputtering behind her. She went straight to her room, locked the door, and stood at the window looking out over the sleeping city. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline from the evening finally catching up to her. She'd done it. She'd faced them, confronted them, refused to play the victim they expected. But what came next? She couldn't stay in her mother's house much longer, not with this tension. She couldn't rely on family money forever. She had no prospects, no connections, no real plan beyond refusing to accept what society prescribed. She was free, but freedom without purpose was just another kind of prison. The knock on her door came near midnight, soft, tentative. Eliza? Her younger brother's voice, uncertain. Are you awake? She opened the door to find Thomas standing in the hallway, still dressed from the evening, looking uncomfortable. I heard what happened, he said without preamble. At the ball. Everyone's talking about it. I'm sure they are. Mother's furious. Father's locked himself in his study. He doesn't want to deal with it. Thomas shifted his weight. I just wanted to say, I'm glad you did it. Eliza blinked, surprised. You are? Edmund's a bastard. Everyone knew it except you. He met her eyes, earnest in a way her 19-year-old brother rarely was. I tried to tell you once, years ago. You wouldn't listen. You were so convinced he was honorable. I was an idiot. You were in love, or thought you were. He paused. Margaret's terrified, you know. She thinks you're going to ruin everything for them. I already did what I came to do. I don't care what happens to them now. Maybe you should. Thomas glanced down the hallway, making sure they were alone. There are rumors about Edmund's finances, that he needed Margaret's dowry to pay off gambling debts, that his uncle's estate wasn't worth as much as everyone thought. Eliza felt something cold settle in her stomach. Where did you hear this? Around. Men talk in clubs, especially after they've been drinking. He shrugged. I don't know if it's true, but if it is, then Margaret might not be as happy as she pretends. After Thomas left, Eliza sat on her bed, processing this new information.
Edmund had needed money. Margaret's dowry was substantial. Father had made sure of that, especially for his favorite daughter. If Edmund had debts, if his inheritance had been less impressive than advertised, then the marriage made perfect sense. Not a love match, a business transaction. And Margaret, sweet, naive Margaret, probably had no idea. Eliza should have felt vindicated, should have felt pleased that Edmund's true nature was showing itself. Instead, she just felt tired. She was done with them, done with the past. She needed to move forward. But how? The answer came unexpectedly, 3 days later, in the form of a letter delivered to the house. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the paper expensive. She broke the seal and read, "Miss Thornbridge, I find myself in need of someone with your particular qualities. Specifically, someone who doesn't care what society thinks and isn't afraid to tell powerful men they're fools. I have a business proposition that may interest you. If you're willing to hear it, meet me at the Belmont Coffee House tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Come alone. L. Varick." Eliza read it twice, then a third time. A business proposition from a man she'd met once, at the ball where she'd publicly humiliated her sister and former almost fiancé. It was irregular, possibly scandalous, definitely not something a respectable woman would consider. She was at the coffee house at 1:45. The Belmont was an odd choice. Not fashionable enough for high society, not rough enough to be truly dangerous. It occupied a middle ground where merchants and minor gentry mixed, where women could enter without causing too much scandal if they were chaperoned. Eliza went alone anyway. Lucien sat at a corner table, a stack of papers in front of him, looking as disheveled as he had at the ball. He glanced up when she approached, something like approval crossing his face. "You came. Good." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Would you like coffee? It's terrible, but it's hot." "What's this about?" Eliza sat, ignoring the curious looks from other patrons. "Direct. I like that." He pushed the papers aside. "I need help. My estate is drowning in debt, my tenants are on the verge of revolt, and I have about 6 months before creditors start seizing property. I've been managing it myself, but I'm one person trying to fix a disaster my father spent 20 years creating. And you think I can help with that?" "I think you understand what it's like to rebuild from ruins. I think you're smart enough to see solutions other people miss. And I think you need something to do that isn't being decorative at balls and waiting for some acceptable man to make you an offer." He leaned forward. "I'm not offering marriage or romance or any of that nonsense. I'm offering work, real work. Come to Ashford, help me sort out this mess. In exchange, I'll pay you a salary and give you independence your mother can't touch." Eliza stared at him. "You want to hire me?" "Why not? You've spent months managing your aunt's estate, from what I've heard. You understand accounts, property management, dealing with difficult people. Those are exactly the skills I need. It's completely irregular. So is telling off your sister's husband at a ball, but you did that too." He smiled slightly. "Look, I know this sounds mad. It probably is, but I'm desperate, you're angry, and between desperation and anger, we might actually accomplish something. People will talk. People are already talking about both of us." He spread his hands. "What do we have to lose?" Everything, Eliza thought. Her reputation, what little remained of it. Her family's goodwill, which was already strained, any chance of a conventional future. But she'd already lost all that, hadn't she? The moment she stood in that chapel doorway and watched her life dissolve. "I want to see the estate first," she said, "and the account books. Before I agree to anything." Lucien's smile widened into something genuine. "We leave tomorrow." "Tomorrow? No point waiting. The disaster isn't getting any less disastrous." He stood, gathering his papers. "Pack, practically. It's a working estate, not a country house party." He left before she could change her mind, disappearing into the London afternoon like smoke. Eliza sat alone at the corner table, a cup of terrible coffee cooling in front of her, and realized she'd just agreed to something completely insane. She couldn't wait to start. Her mother found her packing at dawn. "What are you doing?" The words came out strangled, as if she'd been running. "Thomas said you're leaving. Please tell me he misunderstood." Eliza folded another practical wool dress into her trunk, not the silks and satins her mother had chosen for her season. "He didn't misunderstand. I'm going to work." "Work?" Her mother made it sound like she'd announced plans to become a street performer. "Eliza, this has gone too far. First the scene at the ball, Now this madness about employment. It's not madness. It's survival. Eliza closed the trunk with more force than necessary. I have no husband, no prospects, and after what happened at Lady Pemberton's ball, no chance of either. What exactly do you expect me to do? Sit here and embroider until I die? You could apologize. Make amends. Your father has connections. I don't want father's connections. Eliza turned to face her mother fully. I don't want anything from this family except to be left alone to build something of my own. Her mother's face crumpled, but Eliza felt nothing. Not guilt, not sympathy, not even anger. Just a hollow certainty that this conversation would change nothing. Where are you going? Ashford, Lord Varick's estate. The color drained from her mother's face. The Earl of Ashford? Eliza, his reputation, his family's debts. You cannot seriously be considering, I leave in an hour. People will assume, they'll say you're his mistress. Let them say whatever they want. They're already calling me a bitter spinster who drove her own sister's husband away. At least this way, I'll have money of my own. Her mother sat heavily on the bed, looking older than Eliza had ever seen her. When did you become so hard? When I realized being soft got me nothing but 7 wasted years and a front row seat to my own humiliation. Eliza softened slightly, but only slightly. I'm not trying to hurt you, Mother. I'm trying to survive. This isn't survival. It's self-destruction. Maybe, but it's my choice. The coach that collected her wasn't the elegant vehicle she'd expected. It was sturdy, practical, built for distance rather than impression. Lucien sat inside, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence, looking like he hadn't slept. Morning, he said without looking up. There's bread and cheese in that basket if you're hungry. We've got a 6-hour ride, and I have about 400 pages of accounts to review before we arrive. So much for pleasantries. Eliza climbed in, settled herself, and watched London disappear through the window as the coach lurched into motion. They rode in silence for the first hour. Lucien scribbled notes in margins, occasionally swearing under his breath. Eliza ate the bread, which was surprisingly good, and studied the man who'd somehow convinced her to abandon everything familiar. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way Edmund had been. His features were too sharp, too angular, marked by someone who'd spent more time thinking than charming. But there was an intelligence in his face that she found oddly compelling, a mind constantly working, constantly analyzing. You're staring, he said without looking up from his papers. You said you needed help with accounts. I'm trying to figure out what kind of disaster I've agreed to. The worst kind. He finally met her eyes. My father was a gambler, not the exciting kind who risks everything on a single throw. The slow, steady kind who loses a little bit every day for 20 years until there's nothing left but debt and empty rooms. He gestured at the papers around him. This is what remains, an estate that should support 300 people, reduced to barely functioning with 50. Land that should be profitable, leased to tenants who can't pay because the soil's exhausted and no one's invested in improvements in decades. Then why not sell? The estate's entailed. I can't sell the land, only what's on it, and most of what's on it is already mortgaged. He ran a hand through his hair, making it stand up at odd angles. I've sold the art, the furniture, everything portable and valuable. I've dismissed most of the staff. I've negotiated with creditors until I'm blue in the face. None of it's enough. So what's your plan? Make the land profitable again. Renegotiate tenant agreements, invest in improvements, develop new revenue streams. He laughed, bitter. Simple, right? Except it requires capital I don't have, time I'm running out of, and cooperation from tenants who've been lied to and exploited for so long they don't trust anyone with the Varick name. Eliza absorbed this, the scope of the disaster becoming clearer. And you think I can help with that? I think you're not afraid of hard work or hard truths. I think you understand what it's like to rebuild from nothing. And I think you're angry enough to want to prove everyone wrong. He held her gaze. Am I wrong? No, she admitted. You're not wrong. Then we'll figure it out together, or we'll fail spectacularly trying. He went back to his papers. Either way, it'll be more interesting than sitting in a drawing room waiting for life to happen. Ashford appeared through mist and rain in the late afternoon, and Eliza's first thought was that Lucien had undersold the disaster. The house, mansion, really, stood on a rise overlooking the valley, its once grand facade now showing the scars of neglect. Windows were boarded up. Ivy had claimed entire sections of wall. Parts of the roof looked suspect. The grounds around it had gone half wild, formal gardens dissolving into chaos. It should have been depressing. Instead, Eliza felt something almost like recognition. "It's worse than it looks," Lucien said as the coach rolled up the weed-choked drive. "The east wing is completely uninhabitable. The servants' quarters need major repairs. The kitchens are functional, but barely. We're living in about a quarter of the available space." "How many staff?" 8. Down from 50 when my father was alive. He climbed out before the coach fully stopped. "Mrs. Holloway runs the household, such as it is. She's been here 40 years and takes the estate's decline personally. Fair warning, she doesn't like outsiders, and she especially doesn't like the idea of a young woman coming here to help." Wonderful. The woman who met them at the door lived up to the description. Mrs. Holloway was built like a fortress, solid, immovable, radiating disapproval. She looked Eliza up and down with an expression that suggested she'd found her lacking. "This is Miss Thornbridge," Lucien said. "She'll be staying in the blue room. Have someone bring up her trunk." "My lord, I must protest." "Noted. Do it anyway." He was already walking deeper into the house. "Miss Thornbridge, I'll show you the estate office once you're settled. Dinner's at 8, though don't expect much. We're down to plain fare these days." He disappeared down a corridor, leaving Eliza alone with Mrs. Holloway's glacial stare. "I know what you are," the housekeeper said quietly. "And I know what you're doing here." Do you? Eliza kept her voice level. "Then you're ahead of me because I'm still figuring it out. You're here to take advantage of a desperate man, to worm your way into his confidence and his purse while his estate crumbles. Actually, I'm here to help save the estate, but think whatever you like." Eliza picked up her own trunk. Not heavy, she'd packed light, and started up the stairs. "Which way is the blue room?" Mrs. Holloway's directions were grudging but accurate. The blue room turned out to be in better condition than Eliza had expected. Clean, if sparse, with a good bed and windows overlooking the valley. She unpacked quickly, changed into even more practical clothes, and went to find the estate office. It took 3 wrong turns and a helpful stable boy before she located it. The room was chaos. Papers everywhere, ledgers stacked haphazardly, maps curling on walls, a desk buried under correspondence. Lucien sat in the middle of it all, writing furiously. "Glad you found it," he said without looking up. "Pull up that chair. We have work to do." They worked until the light failed and candles had to be brought in. Lucien walked her through the estate's finances with brutal honesty. The debts, the failing revenue streams, the desperate negotiations with creditors. It was worse than he'd described in the coach. Much worse. "The tenants are the key," he said, spreading a map across the least cluttered section of desk. 20 families, most of them barely surviving. My father raised their rents every year while letting the land deteriorate. They can't pay what they owe, but if I lower the rents, I can't meet my own obligations. Eliza studied the map, the small parcels of land marked with tenant names and amounts owed. What if you forgave the back rent in exchange for improvements? What improvements? They don't have capital either. Not money, labor, knowledge, time. She pointed to one parcel. This land sits beside a stream. Could it support fish farming? This one's near the road. Could the tenant run a small inn? This forest section, timber rights, managed properly? Lucien stared at her. Those would take years to develop. Better than never developing them at all. She pulled a blank sheet of paper toward her. Show me which tenants have which skills. Who's trustworthy? Who's likely to cooperate? We'll build a proposal that benefits both sides. They worked through dinner. Mrs. Holloway brought plain stew on trays and left with audible disapproval, and into the evening. Lucien's initial skepticism faded as they hammered out details, challenging each other, building on half-formed ideas until they had something approaching a real plan. "This could work," he said finally, near midnight. "It's risky, and it'll take time we don't have, but it's better than anything I've come up with alone." "When do we start?" "Tomorrow. We'll ride out to meet the tenants, present the proposal, see who's willing to try." He rubbed his eyes, exhausted. "Fair warning, most of them hate me, hate the Varick name. They're not going to make this easy." "Nothing worth doing is easy." He smiled at that, genuine and unexpected. You sound like someone who's learned that the hard way. I have. They parted for the night, and Eliza climbed the stairs to her borrowed room, feeling more awake than she had in months. This was real. Not drawing rooms and dance cards and careful social performance. Real work, real problems, real stakes. She fell asleep within minutes. The tenants were worse than hostile. They were broken. Eliza saw it in the first cottage they visited, a family of 5 living in 2 rooms with a leaking roof, the father's face carved with resignation, the mother's eyes empty of hope. The children hovered like ghosts, too thin, too quiet. "Mr. Walsh," Lucien began, "I want to discuss your lease." "We don't have the back rent," Walsh interrupted, his voice flat. "I know we're behind. I know you could evict us. If that's what you've come to do, just do it." "That's not why we're here." Eliza stepped forward, drawing their attention. "We're here with a proposal. What if Lord Varick forgave your back rent in exchange for you implementing improvements to the land?" Walsh's wife laughed, a sound like breaking crockery. "Improvements with what? We can barely feed ourselves. Not improvements that cost money. Improvements that use what you have, your knowledge, your labor, your time." Eliza pulled out the plans they'd drawn up. "Your land sits beside the stream. You could develop fish farming, start small, grow gradually. Lord Varick would provide initial supplies and technical help in exchange for a percentage of the eventual profit. And if it fails, then you're no worse off than you are now," Lucien said. "But if it succeeds, you have a new income stream, security, a future." Walsh exchanged a long look with his wife. "Why would you do this? Your father spent 20 years bleeding us dry. Why should we trust you're any different?" "Because I'm not my father," Lucien said quietly. "And because if this estate fails, we all fail. I need you to survive as much as you need me to. This isn't charity, it's mutual preservation." They left without an answer, Walsh promising to think on it. The next 3 cottages went similarly: suspicion, exhaustion, promises to consider. By the 4th visit, Eliza was beginning to understand the depth of damage Lucien's father had done. "They don't believe it's real," she said as they rode between properties. "They think it's a trick. Can you blame them? Every landlord they've ever known has been a parasite." Lucien's jaw was tight. "My father was the worst of them. Charming when he wanted something, vicious when he didn't get it. They learn to trust nothing that sounds too good to be true." "Then we need to prove ourselves. Start small, with 1 tenant willing to take the risk. Use them as an example." The breakthrough came at the 5th cottage, where a widow named Mrs. Fletcher lived with her grown son. She heard them out, arms crossed, expression skeptical but not dismissive. "My husband worked this land for 40 years, she said when they finished. "Watched it get worse every season while your father demanded higher rents. He died owing 3 years back payments. Give me one good reason I should believe you're different." "I can't," Lucien admitted. "Not with words, but let me prove it with actions. Choose any improvement you think would help. I'll provide what you need to start. If it works, we split the profits. If it fails, the debt is forgiven and we try something else." Mrs. Fletcher studied him for a long moment. "The old barn. It's sound enough. I could convert it to a dairy operation, make cheese to sell at market. I know how. My mother taught me, but I'd need cows, equipment, repairs to the cooling cellar." "Done," Lucien said immediately. "I'll have cows delivered within the week. We'll send workers to repair the cellar. You keep 70% of all profits until your back rent is satisfied, then we split 50-50 going forward." 75, Mrs. Fletcher countered. "I'm doing the work." 75, Lucien agreed. They shook on it, and Eliza saw something shift in the widow's face. Not trust, not yet, but possibility. Word spread faster than expected. Within 3 days, 2 more tenants approached with their own improvement proposals. Within a week, half the tenants had agreed to try. The other half remained skeptical, watching, waiting to see if the promises held. Eliza threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised even her. She drew up detailed agreements, tracked expenses, helped negotiate terms. She rode out to the properties daily, sometimes with Lucien, sometimes alone, checking progress, solving problems, learning every inch of the estate. She worked until her body ached, and her mind was too exhausted for the past to intrude. It was exactly what she needed. But London wouldn't let her go so easily. The letter arrived 3 weeks after her arrival at Ashford, delivered by a writer who looked like he'd been paid well for speed. Eliza recognized her mother's handwriting with a sinking feeling. Margaret has fallen ill. The pregnancy is in danger. She's asking for you. Whatever your feelings, she is still your sister. Please come. Eliza read it twice, standing in the estate office, aware of Lucien watching her. Bad news? He asked quietly. My sister, she's ill. The baby. She trailed off, surprised by the complicated knot of emotions in her chest. Anger, yes, but also unwanted concern. You should go. I shouldn't care, Eliza said, more to herself than him. After everything they did, I shouldn't care at all. But you do. Lucien stood, came around the desk. Look, I understand complicated family relationships better than most. My father destroyed everything he touched, and I still attended his funeral. Still wept, even though he didn't deserve my tears. You can hate what your sister did, and still care if she lives or dies. Going back to London means facing all of them again. Edmund, my parents, the gossip, everything I left behind. Then face it. Show them you survived. Show them you're thriving. He paused. And come back. We're not done here. The ride to London took 7 hours, during which Eliza had far too much time to think. She'd left to escape, to rebuild, to become someone who didn't need Margaret's approval or Edmund's validation. Going back felt like regression, like stepping backward into a version of herself she'd fought to leave behind. But Margaret was her sister. However complicated, however damaged, that bond still existed somewhere beneath the betrayal. The Thornbridge townhouse looked exactly the same. Eliza stood on the street, gathering courage, before climbing the steps and knocking. Henderson answered, relief flooding his face. Miss Eliza, thank goodness. Your mother's been beside herself. The house felt smaller than she remembered, stuffier, like the walls had closed in during her absence. She heard voices upstairs, urgent and low. Her mother appeared at the top of the stairs, looking haggard. Eliza, you came. I wasn't sure you would. How is she? The doctor's with her now. He says the next few hours will tell. Her mother descended slowly, as if aged by weeks rather than days. She's been asking for you, won't rest until she sees you. And Edmund? Pacing in the library? Her mother's expression flickered with something Eliza couldn't quite read. He's not handling this well. Margaret's room was dim, curtains drawn, air thick with the smell of illness and medicines. She lay in bed, pale as the sheets, one hand pressed to her rounded stomach. The doctor was closing his bag, expression grave. She needs rest and calm, he said quietly to Eliza's mother. No stress, no excitement. The pregnancy is precarious. He left, and Eliza approached the bed slowly. Margaret's eyes fluttered open, finding her. You came, she whispered. I didn't think you would. Mother said you asked for me. I need to tell you something before... She broke off, breathing hard. Before it's too late. Eliza pulled a chair close, sat. Tell me what? Edmund. Margaret's hand found hers, grip surprisingly strong. He's not what I thought. Not what you thought either. The money. Eliza, there is no money. There never was. I know about the debts. Not just debts, gambling losses, loans from dangerous people. Tears slipped down Margaret's temples. He married me for my dowry. All of it's gone already, paid to creditors. And now with the baby coming, he's desperate. He keeps talking about selling father's business connections, leveraging the family name. I think... Her voice dropped to barely audible. I think he might do something terrible. What do you mean terrible? Before Margaret could answer, the door opened. Edmund stood in the threshold, and the expression on his face made Eliza's blood run cold. How touching, he said, voice dripping with false charm. The reconciliation scene. Margaret, darling, you should be resting. We need to talk, Margaret said, trying to sit up and failing. About the money, about what you've been planning. What I've been planning is saving this family from ruin. Edmund closed the door behind him, and something about the deliberate click of the latch felt threatening. Something your perfect sister here abandoned us to deal with alone. I abandoned nothing, Eliza said, standing.
You made your choices, Edmund. You chose Margaret, chose her money, chose this life. Don't blame me for the consequences.
Consequences. He laughed, bitter. You know nothing about consequences. You ran away to play at being useful while the rest of us dealt with reality. What reality? The reality that you're a liar? That you married Margaret for her dowry and spent it all before the ink dried on the marriage certificate? His face went dark. Careful, Eliza. You're not as untouchable as you think. Is that a threat? It's advice. He moved closer, and Eliza had to force herself not to step back. You've made quite a spectacle of yourself in London. The ball, the scandal, running off to live with that bankrupt Earl. People are talking, making assumptions about your character, your morals, your worth. Let them talk. What if I told them more? What if I shared certain details about our relationship, about promises you made, liberties you allowed? His smile was cruel. Your reputation is already damaged. I could destroy it completely. Margaret made a small sound of distress. Edmund, no. You wouldn't. Wouldn't I? He turned to his wife, expression contemptuous. Everything I've done has been for us, for this family you claim to care about. If your sister's ruin helps secure our position, then so be it. You're insane, Eliza said, voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. You'd destroy me just to cover up your own failures? I'd do whatever necessary to survive. Some of us don't have the luxury of wealthy protectors to run to when things get difficult. Lucien isn't my protector. He's my employer. Is he? How convenient. Edmund's voice dripped with insinuation. The disgraced spinster and the desperate Earl working so closely together. I'm sure it's all perfectly innocent. The door opened again, and this time it was Eliza's father, his face red with anger. What's going on here? He took in the scene, Margaret crying in bed, Edmund's aggressive stance, Eliza standing her ground. I could hear shouting from downstairs. Just a family discussion, Edmund said smoothly, but his jaw was tight. About expectations and responsibilities. Then have it elsewhere. My daughter needs rest. Her father pointed at the door. Out, both of you. Edmund left first, but not before shooting Eliza a look that promised this wasn't over. She followed slowly, her mind racing. In the hallway, her father caught her arm. What did he mean about your reputation? What have you been doing at Ashford? Working, managing accounts, organizing tenants, trying to save an estate? Working. Her father said it like a curse. Like some common clerk. Eliza, this has to stop. These delusions of independence, this refusal to accept your place, my place. She pulled her arm free. What place is that, father? The one where I waited 7 years for a man who was using me? Or the one where I'm expected to accept whatever scraps society offers because I dared to exist outside their rules? You're my daughter. Then trust me to know what's best for my own life. She was shaking now, months of suppressed anger finally breaking through. You want to know what I've learned at Ashford? That I'm capable of more than you ever gave me credit for. That I can solve problems, make decisions, build something real, and that I don't need anyone's permission to do it. She left him standing in the hallway and went to find her mother. The confrontation happened in her father's study, all of them gathered like players in a badly written drama. Edmund sat beside Margaret, who looked worse than before, face drawn with pain and stress. Eliza's parents stood by the fireplace, united in their disapproval. And Eliza stood alone by the window, watching the street outside and wishing she was anywhere else. We need to address this situation, her father began. The gossip, the scandal, the damage being done to this family's reputation. It cannot continue. What damage? Eliza asked. The damage of me having a life outside this house? The damage of you living with a man, unmarried, without proper chaperonage, her mother said sharply. People are talking, Eliza, saying terrible things. Let them talk. This isn't just about you, Margaret's voice cracked. Everything you do reflects on all of us. On me, on my baby, on father's business. Edmund says a lot of things, Eliza interrupted. Most of them lies. Edmund stood, face flushed. Careful. Or what? You'll spread more rumors? Go ahead. Tell them whatever you want. It won't change the truth. The truth, he said slowly, is that you're a bitter, desperate woman who's throwing away what little respectability she has left out of spite.
The truth is that you're a liar and a manipulator who married my sister for money, and now you're trying to cover up your failures by destroying me." The room erupted. Her father shouted. Her mother gasped. Margaret wept. Edmund lunged toward her, and Eliza didn't flinch. "Enough!" Her father's voice cut through the chaos. "Eliza, you will return to this house immediately. You will sever all connection with Lord Varick, and you will comport yourself with the dignity befitting this family's name." "No." The word fell into sudden silence. "What did you say?" Her father's voice was dangerously quiet.
"I said no. I'm not coming back. I'm not giving up the life I'm building, and I'm not letting any of you control me anymore." Eliza turned to face them all, something fierce and free rising in her chest. "I'm done being who you want me to be. I'm done waiting for permission to exist. If you walk out that door," her father said, "you're not welcome back. I'll cut off your allowance. You'll have nothing. Then I'll have nothing. I've survived worse." She walked to the door, hand on the handle, and looked back one last time. Margaret was crying. Her mother looked stricken. Her father stood rigid with fury, and Edmund watched with an expression that promised revenge. "I'm sorry, Margaret," Eliza said quietly. "I hope you and the baby survive this. I really do. But I can't save you. I can barely save myself." She opened the door and stepped through, and heard Edmund's voice follow her into the hall. "You'll regret this, Eliza. I'll make sure of it." She didn't look back. The coach she'd hired was waiting outside. She climbed in, gave the driver directions to return to Ashford, and sat in the darkness as London disappeared behind her once again. She'd burned every bridge, cut every tie, made herself completely alone except for a bankrupt earl and a dying estate in the middle of nowhere. But she'd never felt more free. The journey back was long and cold. Eliza dozed fitfully, jolting awake at every sound, Edmund's threat echoing in her mind. He'd meant it. Whatever he was planning, whatever desperate gambit he had in mind, she'd put herself directly in his crosshairs. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt grimly determined. Let him try. Ashford's lights appeared near midnight, warm and welcoming in the darkness. Lucian himself came out when the coach pulled up, wrapped in a coat against the cold. "That was quick," he said, helping her down. "I didn't expect you back for days." Things went badly. She was exhausted, wrung out from emotion and travel. "My family's disowned me. My former almost fiancé threatened to ruin me completely, and I'm fairly certain I've made enemies I can't afford. So an average day with family, then." He studied her face in the lamplight. "Are you all right?" "I will be." She paused. "If you'll still have me. I have no money now, no prospects, nothing but my skills and my determination. If that's not enough..." "It's more than enough." He said it simply, matter of fact. "Come inside. Mrs. Holloway saved you dinner, though she'll deny it was on purpose." They walked into the house together, and Eliza felt something settle in her chest. This wasn't home. Not yet. But it was refuge. And right now, that was enough. She didn't know Edmund had already written his letters, spreading carefully crafted lies about her conduct and character, until it was too late. She didn't know creditors were coming for Ashford, armed with new information about Lucien's assets and plans, until they arrived at the gates 3 days later with legal documents and hired muscle. She didn't know Margaret had miscarried the baby the night of their confrontation, and that Edmund blamed Eliza publicly and viciously, until the newspaper arrived with the story on the front page. She was sitting in the estate office reviewing tenant agreements when Lucian burst in with the paper, his face ashen. "Eliza," he said, "we have a problem." The headline screamed across the top of the page. "Tragedy strikes Fairfax family. Beloved wife loses child after sister's cruel visit." Eliza's hands went numb as she read. The article painted her as a monster, a bitter, jealous woman who'd confronted her pregnant sister with such viciousness that it had triggered a miscarriage. Edmund's quotes dripped with manufactured grief and barely concealed accusation. Her own family had declined to comment, which somehow made it worse. "They're saying I killed the baby," she whispered. "That my cruelty, It's lies." Lucian snatched the paper away from her. Vicious, calculated lies. Anyone who knows you would see that immediately. "But no one knows me. Not in London. They only know the story Edmund's telling." She felt the walls closing in. The careful life she'd been building suddenly precarious. "This will destroy everything." The tenants who are starting to trust us, the creditors we're negotiating with, they'll all see this and believe I'm exactly what he says I am. Then we prove them wrong. Lucian's voice was hard, determined. We fight back. How? Edmund has the sympathy, the platform, The office door burst open. Mrs. Holloway stood there, face flushed with anger, 3 of the tenant farmers behind her. Is it true? She demanded. What the paper says about you? Eliza stood, forcing herself to meet their eyes. No, my sister lost the baby, and I'm devastated about that. But I didn't cause it. Edmund is lying to cover up his own failures. He says you threatened her, made her so upset she collapsed. This from Mr. Walsh, the first tenant who'd agreed to the improvements. Says you've been living here in sin, trading on Lord Varick's desperation. I've been living here working, Eliza said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Managing accounts, organizing improvements, doing exactly what I was hired to do, nothing more. You're asking us to believe you over a grieving father? Mrs. Fletcher, the widow with the dairy operation, looked uncertain. Over what's printed in a London newspaper? I'm asking you to look at what I've actually done here. Have I lied to you? Have I cheated you? Have I done anything except try to help save this estate and your livelihoods along with it? They exchanged uncertain glances. Mrs. Holloway's jaw was tight, but something in her expression had shifted from pure hostility to calculation. The creditors are here, she said abruptly. Arrived an hour ago with legal papers. They're in the main hall demanding to see Lord Varick immediately. Lucien swore under his breath. They weren't supposed to come for another month. We had an agreement. Seems someone informed them about new assets, Mrs. Holloway said, looking pointedly at Eliza. Recent improvements, potential income streams that weren't disclosed. Understanding crashed over Eliza like ice water. Edmund, he somehow found out about our plans and told the creditors. Made it look like Lucian was hiding assets, which means they can call in the debts immediately. Lucien finished, his face pale. We're not ready. The improvements are barely started. There's no income to show yet, no. Then we show them potential, Eliza interrupted. We show them a plan so solid, so well organized, that they'd be fools to seize everything now instead of waiting for profit. They won't listen to me. I've been negotiating in circles with them for months. Lucien ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. They think I'm just like my father, all promises and no follow-through. Then they'll listen to me. Eliza straightened, something cold and clear forming in her mind. I'm the notorious woman from the newspaper, right? The one causing scandals and destroying reputations? Let's use that. The main hall looked like a battlefield preparing for war. 4 men in expensive suits clustered near the entrance, flanked by 2 larger men who were obviously hired for intimidation rather than accounting. They had papers spread across a hastily cleared table, marking off assets with the enthusiasm of vultures picking a carcass. The lead creditor, a thin man named Pemberton with calculating eyes, looked up as Eliza and Lucien entered. His gaze swept over Eliza with obvious contempt. Lord Varick, he said, ignoring her entirely, we've given you more than enough time to make good on your father's debts. The new information we've received suggests you've been developing income streams while claiming poverty. That constitutes fraud. The improvements haven't generated income yet, Lucien began, but Pemberton cut him off. That's not our concern. You have 72 hours to pay what's owed, or we begin seizure of all movable assets. The livestock, equipment, remaining furniture, all of it. You can't do that, Eliza said, stepping forward. Those assets are essential to the estate's operation. Seizing them guarantees you'll never recover your investment. Pemberton finally looked at her, his lip curling slightly. And you are? Eliza Thornbridge, estate manager. The woman from the newspaper. His smile was unpleasant. The one who killed her sister's baby with her cruelty? Forgive me if I don't put much stock in your professional opinion. The words hit like a slap, but Eliza didn't flinch. Believe what you want about my character, but look at these numbers. She pulled the detailed plans from her satchel, spreading them across the table with deliberate confidence. Every improvement, every projected income stream, every expense and timeline. We're not hiding assets, we're building them. Building them with what money? One of the other creditors, an older man with shrewd eyes, leaned forward. This all requires capital. Minimal capital. Most improvements are labor-based, using existing resources and tenant expertise. She pointed to specific entries. The dairy operation is already producing. Small quantities, but growing. The fish farming starts generating income within 6 months. The timber management plan is on a 3-year cycle, but will triple current yields. The inn by the road is under renovation using salvaged materials and tenant labor. Pretty projections, Pemberton said dismissively. We've heard them before. Not from me, you haven't. Eliza met his eyes steadily. And not with this level of detail. You can verify every number, visit every site, interview every tenant. This isn't fantasy, it's happening right now. The shrewd older creditor, his nameplate read Harrison, picked up the documents, actually reading them. These projections assume full tenant cooperation. What guarantee do we have they'll follow through? Ask them yourself. Eliza gestured toward the door where several of the tenants had gathered, listening. Mr. Walsh, tell them about your fish farming operation. Walsh stepped forward reluctantly, cap in his hands. Started 2 weeks ago. Got 20 breeding pairs, built proper ponds with drainage. Miss Thornbridge here showed me how to calculate feed ratios, manage water quality. In 6 months, I'll have fish to sell at market, maybe clear 15 pounds profit the first year, more after that. And the back rent you owe? Pemberton asked sharply. Forgiven in exchange for implementing the improvements, Walsh said, but only if they work. If they don't, I'm back where I started. Lord Varick's taking the risk, not me. Harrison looked at Eliza with new interest. You structured it so the estate bears the risk? We structured it so everyone benefits if it works, Eliza corrected. The tenants get debt forgiveness and new income. The estate gets diversified revenue and loyal tenants. And you get an estate that's actually worth something instead of a pile of debt and empty buildings. Or we get more delays and excuses while you play at being an estate manager, Pemberton snapped. But he sounded less certain now. Mrs. Fletcher pushed forward. I can show you the dairy, the cheese I made yesterday, the orders I already have from the village shop. It's small, yes, but it's real. More real than anything Lord Varick's father ever accomplished. More tenants stepped forward, each describing their improvements, their progress, their commitment. Eliza watched the creditors' faces, seeing calculation replace dismissal. They were businessmen first, and businessmen understood numbers. This is all very touching, Pemberton said finally. But it doesn't change the fundamental problem. The debts are due. Either you pay them or we seize assets. Those are the terms. Then modify the terms, Eliza said. Give us 6 months. If the improvements haven't generated measurable income by then, take everything. But if they have, and they will, you get paid in full with interest, and you maintain a stake in a profitable estate instead of destroying a potentially lucrative investment. Why would we trust you? Pemberton gestured at her with contempt. You're the woman everyone in London is talking about, the scandalous, cruel. Careful, Lucian said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. I'd think very carefully before you finish that sentence. Harrison held up a hand. Enough. Pemberton, sit down. You're letting personal distaste cloud business judgment. He turned to Eliza. Miss Thornbridge, your plan is detailed and your tenants seem committed, but there's still significant risk. All investment has risk, Eliza countered. But consider the alternative. You seize everything now, you get maybe 40% of what you're owed, and the estate collapses entirely. You write off the rest as a loss. Or you wait 6 months, let us prove the model works, and you get 100% plus interest. And what do you get out of this? Harrison asked shrewdly. Why are you fighting so hard for an estate that's not yours? Eliza paused. It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. Because I'm tired of watching people with power destroy things just because they can, she said quietly. Lord Varick's father destroyed this estate through greed and negligence. My former almost fiancé destroyed my sister through manipulation and lies. I've spent my whole life watching powerful men break things and walk away while everyone else suffers the consequences. I'm done with it. This estate, these tenants, they deserve a chance to rebuild. And so do I. Silence filled the hall. Harrison studied her for a long moment, then looked at his fellow creditors. We'll take a vote, he said. All in favor of accepting Miss Thornbridge's proposal. 6 months extension with monthly progress reviews and full repayment if targets are met? 3 hands went up, including Harrison's. Pemberton's remained down, his face sour. Motion carries 6 months, Miss Thornbridge, but we'll be watching closely. 1 missed target, 1 hint of deception, and we seize everything. Understood? Understood, Eliza said. relief flooding through her so intensely she felt dizzy. The creditors left with promises to return in a month for the first progress review. The tenants dispersed slowly, talking among themselves in low voices. Mrs. Holloway stood in the doorway, watching everything with an unreadable expression. When everyone was gone, Lucian turned to Eliza, something like awe in his face. "You just bought us 6 months of breathing room," he said. What did you? "I told them the truth and made it make financial sense," Eliza said, suddenly exhausted. "That's all. That's everything." He grabbed her hands, an impulsive gesture that surprised them both. "Eliza, without you, they would have seized everything today. The estate would be finished. You saved it. You saved all of us." "We're not saved yet. We have 6 months to prove the model works. If we fail, we won't fail." His certainty was absolute. "Not with you here." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither seemed ready to name. Then footsteps in the hallway broke the spell, and they stepped apart quickly. Mrs. Holloway entered, her expression still unreadable. She looked at Eliza for a long moment, then said, "I was wrong about you." "What? I thought you were here to take advantage, to use Lord Varick for your own gain. I see now that I misjudged you." The admission clearly cost her, but she held Eliza's gaze. "What you did just now, that took more courage than I've seen in this house in 20 years. You have my respect, Miss Thornbridge, and my apology." She left before Eliza could respond, leaving her standing in the hall with Lucienne, trying to process what had just happened. "Did Mrs. Holloway just apologize to you?" Lucienne asked, incredulous. "I think so. I'm not entirely sure. It might have been a stress hallucination." He laughed, and the tension of the last few hours finally broke. They were still in trouble. Edmund's lies still circulated in London. The creditors would be watching their every move, and 6 months wasn't much time to turn projections into profits. But they'd won this battle. They'd bought themselves time. It was enough to build on. The next weeks blurred into frantic activity. Eliza threw herself into proving their projections weren't fantasy. She rode out to tenant properties daily, checking progress, solving problems, adjusting plans when reality didn't match expectations. She worked with Mrs. Fletcher to expand the dairy operation. She helped Mr. Walsh troubleshoot issues with the fish ponds. She negotiated with suppliers for better prices on materials they needed. She also started keeping detailed records of everything, not just for the creditors, but for her own defense. If Edmund was spreading lies about her in London, she'd counter with documented proof of what she was actually doing. Every letter from tenants thanking her for help, every receipt showing legitimate business expenses, every progress report showing measurable improvements. Documentation was boring, tedious work, but it was armor. Lucienne worked alongside her, and slowly something shifted between them. The careful professional distance eroded under the pressure of shared goals and mutual respect. They fell into an easy partnership. He handled the legal and financial negotiations while she managed operations and tenant relations. They reviewed progress each evening, often working late into the night, and gradually their conversations expanded beyond just business. "Tell me something," he said one evening as they reviewed ledgers by candlelight. "When you were waiting for Edmund all those years, did you actually want to marry him? Or did you just want to want it?" The question caught her off guard. "What kind of question is that?" "An honest one." He set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "I've noticed you never talk about him with any real longing. You talk about the betrayal, the humiliation, the waste of time, but you never say you miss him. You never sound like someone who lost the love of their life." Eliza considered this, surprised by how clearly she could see it now. "I loved the idea of him, the story I'd built in my head about our future together. But the actual man..." She shook her head. "I don't think I ever really knew him. I knew what I wanted him to be. And now? Now I know the difference between fantasy and reality, between performing a role and actually living." She met his eyes. "Now I know what it feels like to build something real." Something passed between them, acknowledgement of feelings neither was quite ready to voice. Then Lucienne cleared his throat and returned to the ledgers, and the moment passed. But it stayed with her. The first progress review came 4 weeks after the creditor's initial visit. Harrison arrived alone, which Eliza took as a good sign. Pemberton would have come looking for reasons to shut them down. Harrison came looking at numbers. They walked him through everything: the expanding dairy operation, the fish ponds now showing healthy growth, The timber management plan underway. The inn nearly ready to open. They showed him receipts, orders, projections adjusted with real data. Harrison reviewed everything with meticulous attention, asking sharp questions, probing for weaknesses. Eliza answered each one honestly, neither exaggerating successes nor minimizing challenges. Finally, he set down the papers and looked at them both. I'm impressed, genuinely. You're ahead of schedule on most improvements and only slightly behind on a few. The tenants I interviewed seemed committed and cautiously optimistic. Does that mean, Lucian began, it means you're meeting expectations. Keep it up. Harrison stood, preparing to leave. However, I should warn you, Pemberton is not pleased. He's been making inquiries about Miss Thornbridge, talking to people in London, trying to find evidence to discredit her. He seems to take your situation personally. Why? Eliza asked, though she suspected she knew. He's friends with Edmund Fairfax, Harrison said bluntly. I didn't know that when we first arrived, or I would have recused him from this case. There's a clear conflict of interest, but he's refusing to step back, and I can only outvote him, not remove him. After Harrison left, Eliza felt the weight of Edmund's vendetta settling heavier on her shoulders. It wasn't enough that he destroyed her reputation in London. Now he was actively trying to sabotage her work at Ashford. He won't stop, she said quietly. He'll keep attacking until he destroys everything I'm trying to build here. Then we make sure there's nothing to attack, Lucian said. We make the estate so obviously successful that even Pemberton can't argue with the results. They doubled down on everything. Eliza worked harder than ever, spending every waking hour on estate business. The tenants responded to her dedication, word spreading that Miss Thornbridge don't ask nothing she won't do herself. She helped repair fences, muck out stables, haul supplies. She showed up when tenants needed help, solved problems no one else wanted to touch. And slowly, the skepticism transformed into grudging respect. The turning point came 2 months into their 6-month deadline. Mrs. Fletcher's cheese had developed a reputation in the surrounding villages. Demand exceeded supply. She came to Eliza with a proposal. Expand the operation, bring in 2 more tenants to help, triple production within a year. But I'd need more cows, more equipment, more space, she said, worrying the edge of her apron. I know we don't have capital for that kind of investment. What if we borrowed against the expected income? Eliza suggested. Show the creditors your order book, your current profit margins, your expansion plan. Ask them to front the capital for equipment in exchange for a percentage of the increased profits. They'd never agree to that. They might. They're businessmen. Good business is hard to argue with. They presented the proposal to Harrison at the next progress review. He studied the numbers, interviewed Mrs. Fletcher, visited the dairy operation, and finally agreed to front the capital for expansion at 15% interest. It was high, but it was doable, and it set a precedent. Within weeks, other tenants approached with similar proposals. Mr. Walsh wanted to expand the fish farming. Another tenant wanted to start a small brewery using estate-grown barley. A fourth wanted to develop a market garden supplying the surrounding villages. Each proposal was carefully vetted, documented, and presented to the creditors. Not all were approved, but enough were that the estate began transforming from a collection of failing farms into a network of small enterprises, all interconnected and supporting each other. The change wasn't just financial. The atmosphere at Ashford shifted. Tenants who'd been sullen and resentful became engaged and hopeful. They started maintaining their properties better, helping each other with projects, planning for futures that extended beyond bare survival. Mrs. Holloway noticed. Haven't seen the estate like this since I was a girl, she said one afternoon, watching tenant children playing near the fountain that Lucian and several tenants had repaired together. Before Lord Varick's father ruined everything, it's like watching it come back to life. Eliza felt something loosen in her chest. This was real. They were actually succeeding. The letter from London arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a writer who looked exhausted from fast travel. Eliza recognized Margaret's handwriting with a jolt of surprise. Eliza, I know I have no right to ask anything of you after everything that's happened, but I need you to know the truth about what Edmund has been doing. I can't stay silent anymore. The miscarriage wasn't your fault. The doctor told me privately that it was likely to happen regardless. Something about my health, about risks he'd warned me about before I even conceived. But Edmund blamed you publicly because it was convenient, because it gave him sympathy and deflected attention from his own failures. He's been borrowing money using father's business connections as collateral, promising investments and partnerships that father knows nothing about. He's drowning in debt even worse than before, and he's gotten desperate. He's been telling people in London that you're the reason for all of it, that your scandal damaged the family's reputation so badly that father's business suffered. It's all lies, but people are believing him. I'm leaving him. I should have left months ago, but I was too ashamed to admit I'd made such a terrible mistake. I'm going to stay with mother's sister in Bath until I can figure out what comes next. I'm sorry, Eliza, for everything, for choosing him, for lying to you, for being too weak to stand up to him when it mattered. You were right about him all along. I just wish I'd listened. Your sister Margaret. Eliza read the letter twice, emotions cascading through her. Relief that Margaret was finally seeing clearly, anger at Edmund's continued manipulation, and a complicated sort of forgiveness for her sister, who'd been as much a victim of Edmund's schemes as anyone. She showed the letter to Lucian. This confirms what we suspected about Edmund, but it also means he's getting more desperate. Desperate men do dangerous things. We'll be ready, Lucian said. Whatever he tries, we'll handle it. But Edmund's next move was something neither of them anticipated. The London Society page published a long article about provincial scandals and fallen women, featuring Eliza prominently. It detailed her life at Ashford with salacious speculation about her relationship with Lucian, her influence over the tenants, her unnatural ambition and masculine behavior. It painted her as a cautionary tale of what happened when women rejected their proper roles. Worse, it hinted that she'd been involved in financial impropriety, that she was manipulating estate funds for personal gain, that her so-called improvements were actually schemes to enrich herself at the expense of desperate tenants. The accusations were baseless, but they were dangerous. If the creditors believed them, if they thought she was embezzling or defrauding the estate, they could seize everything immediately. We fight back, Lucian said grimly. We publish the truth, show the documentation, the proof of what you've actually accomplished. That won't be enough. Eliza stared at the article, mind racing. Edmund isn't just trying to ruin my reputation anymore. He's trying to destroy the entire estate out of spite. We need to cut him off at the source. How? We need proof of his crimes, real documented evidence that he's been defrauding father's business, forging partnerships, borrowing money illegally. If we can expose him publicly, it discredits everything he's said about me. And how do we get that proof? We're not in London, and we don't have access to his records. Eliza thought about Margaret's letter, about her sister finally finding the courage to leave. I know someone who might. She wrote to Margaret that night asking for help. It was a risk. Margaret was fragile, newly separated, dealing with her own trauma. But she was also the only person with access to Edmund's private papers, his correspondence, his financial records. The response came faster than expected. I'll help. I'm done protecting him. Tell me what you need. Over the next 3 weeks, Margaret sent careful copies of documents, letters to creditors, forged agreements using her father's signature, loan applications based on fabricated assets. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of Edmund's fraud. Eliza compiled everything into a comprehensive report, documented and cross-referenced, impossible to dismiss as rumor or spite. She sent copies to Harrison, to Margaret's father, and to a journalist in London known for exposing financial corruption. Then she waited. The explosion, when it came, was spectacular. The journalist published a series of articles detailing Edmund Fairfax's fraud, complete with reproduced documents and testimony from victims. Margaret's father, furious at having his name and reputation used without permission, filed legal complaints. Creditors began circling Edmund like sharks. And suddenly, the narrative shifted. Eliza wasn't the bitter, cruel woman who'd caused a miscarriage. She was the victim of a systematic campaign of lies by a desperate criminal trying to cover his tracks. Her exile to Ashford wasn't scandal. It was escape from a man who'd tried to destroy her for refusing to stay quiet about his crimes. London society, always hungry for a new angle, pivoted with stunning speed. The same publications that had vilified her now praised her resilience. The same people who'd whispered about her scandal now called her brave. Harrison arrived at Ashford with the news. Pemberton has recused himself from your case. Given his friendship with Fairfax and the obvious conflict of interest, he had no choice. The remaining creditors have reviewed your progress and are prepared to offer a settlement. reduced interest rates in exchange for continued cooperation and a stake in the estate's future profits. We accept, Lucian said immediately. There's more. Harrison pulled out another document. Several investors have expressed interest in financing further estate improvements based on your success so far. You'd retain control, but have capital for expansion. It's an opportunity most estates would kill for. Eliza looked at Lucian, saw her own shock mirrored in his face. They'd gone from days away from seizure to having investors competing to fund them. How? She asked. Your story got out, Harrison said simply. Not the lies Edmund Fairfax was spreading, but the truth. The woman who rebuilt herself and an entire estate through hard work and innovation. People want to be part of that success. They want to invest in the future you're building. After Harrison left, Eliza and Lucian stood in the estate office, surrounded by evidence of what they'd accomplished. Ledgers showing profits, letters from satisfied tenants, proposals for new improvements. We did it, Lucian said quietly. We actually did it. We're not done yet, Eliza cautioned. We still have 3 months left on the original agreement and, Eliza. He turned to face her fully. Stop and acknowledge this. You saved this estate. You saved these people. You saved me. Take a moment to recognize what you've accomplished. She met his eyes, and something in his expression made her breath catch. They were standing closer than she'd realized, close enough that she could see the exhaustion and determination, and something else in his face. I couldn't have done it without you, she said softly. You could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to. He reached out, hesitated, then took her hand. Eliza, I need to tell you something. I know the timing is terrible, and we still have so much work ahead of us, but A knock on the door interrupted him. Mrs. Holloway stood there, looking almost pleased, an expression so rare it was startling. My lord, Miss Thornbridge, the tenants are gathered in the courtyard. They want to speak with you both. They found the courtyard full of people, not just tenants, but their families, workers from the surrounding villages, suppliers they'd been working with. Mrs. Fletcher stood at the front, looking nervous but determined. We wanted to say thank you, she began. Proper thanks, not just words. Lord Varick, you gave us a chance when you could have just given up. And Miss Thornbridge, she paused, emotion thickening her voice. You showed us we were worth fighting for, that our work mattered, that we could build something better. Mr. Walsh stepped forward, holding a carefully wrapped package. We made this for you. All of us contributed something. Eliza unwrapped it to find a leather-bound ledger, beautifully crafted, with Ashford Estate, Records of Renewal, embossed on the cover. Inside, the tenants had documented their own improvements, their progress, their hopes for the future. Each entry was signed, dated, personal. So you'll remember, Mrs. Fletcher said, what we built together, what you made possible. Eliza's throat closed with emotion. These people, who'd been so broken, so suspicious, were giving her their trust, their gratitude, their respect. Thank you, she managed. All of you. This means more than you know. As the crowd dispersed, Lucian leaned close and murmured, Still think you haven't accomplished anything? She laughed, wiping at her eyes. All right, I'll acknowledge it. We're winning. We are. He paused, then added quietly, And when we've won completely, when the estate is secure, and the future is certain, I'm going to finish that conversation we started earlier. What conversation? His smile was slow, genuine, full of promise. The one about us. The conversation about us hung between them for 3 more weeks, unfinished but present in every shared glance, every accidental touch, every moment when their work brought them close enough to feel the pull. Neither was quite ready to acknowledge aloud. They were too busy. That's what Eliza told herself. The final creditor review was approaching. Investors needed proposals. Tenants required guidance on expansion plans. There was no time for personal complications. But late at night, alone in her room, she'd think about the way Lucian looked at her across the estate office, the way his voice softened when he said her name, the way they'd built something together that felt like more than just a professional partnership. She was terrified of it, terrified of wanting something again, of trusting someone again, of being vulnerable enough to let another person matter. But she wanted it anyway. The final creditor review was scheduled for the first week of December, Exactly 6 months after that desperate confrontation in the main hall. This time, all the creditors came. Even Pemberton, though he stayed silent in the back, his presence a sullen reminder of Edmund's failed vendetta. They toured every improvement. The dairy operation, now producing 3 varieties of cheese sold in 5 villages. The fish ponds, generating steady income and employing 2 additional workers. The timber management program, already showing improved yields. The inn, fully operational and booked solid through the holiday season. The brewery, the market gardens, the renovated cottages, all of it. Harrison took pages of notes, asked dozens of questions, examined every ledger. The other creditors did the same, their expressions shifting from skepticism to grudging approval to something approaching enthusiasm. They reconvened in the estate office, papers spread across every surface, the evidence of transformation undeniable. Miss Thornbridge, Harrison began, when you presented your initial proposal 6 months ago, I thought you were either remarkably brave or completely delusional. I'm pleased to say it was the former. Does that mean, Eliza started, it means you've exceeded every target we set. The estate is generating sustainable income, the tenants are thriving, and the projections for continued growth are solid. He pulled out a formal document. We're prepared to forgive 20% of the remaining debt in recognition of the estate's improved value and to refinance the rest at significantly reduced interest rates. Lucian's hand found Eliza's under the table, squeezing hard. She squeezed back, not trusting herself to speak. Furthermore, Harrison continued, the investors I mentioned are prepared to offer capital for continued expansion, £2,000 immediately, with more available as needed. You'd retain full control of the estate, with investors receiving a percentage of profits above a certain threshold. We accept, Lucian said, his voice rough with emotion. All of it. We accept. The creditors filed out, even Pemberton managing a stiff nod of acknowledgement. When the office door closed behind them, Eliza and Lucian stood in silence, the magnitude of what they'd accomplished finally sinking in. We did it, she whispered. We actually did it. You did it. Lucian turned to face her fully. Don't downplay your role in this. You saved everything. The estate, the tenants, me, all of it. We saved it together. Then let's celebrate together. He was still holding her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. Properly. Not with work and planning and worry about the future, but just us. If you want that. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. That conversation you mentioned. About us. Yes. I'm scared, she admitted. The last time I let myself want something, someone, it destroyed me. I don't know if I can survive that again. I'm not asking you to survive anything. I'm asking you to live. With me. As partners in everything, not just estate management. He paused, searching her face. I love you, Eliza. I've loved you since you stood in that coffee house and agreed to something completely insane because you were too stubborn to accept defeat. I love your intelligence, your determination, your refusal to perform weakness even when the world demands it. And I want, if you're willing, to build a life with you that's ours. Not society's, not what anyone expects, but ours. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying in their sincerity. I love you too, Eliza said, the admission feeling like jumping off a cliff. I think I have for months, but I was too afraid to acknowledge it. Too afraid of being wrong again, of trusting the wrong person again. I'm not the wrong person. Lucian stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. I'm the person who's seen you at your worst and your best and wants both. I'm the person who'll challenge you when you need it and support you when you don't. I'm the person who's choosing you, Eliza, fully, completely. No conditions, no expectations except that we face whatever comes next together. She reached up, touching his face, tracing the scar along his jawline. That sounds like a proposal. It is. Not a conventional one, but we've never been conventional. His smile was crooked, hopeful. Marry me. Be my partner in everything. Help me finish rebuilding this estate and then build something even bigger. Travel with me to other failing estates and teach them what we've learned here. Change the way people think about land management, about tenant relations, about what's possible when you actually respect the people who work for you. You want to turn this into a career? Saving estates? I want to turn this into a life. Our life. He pulled her closer. Say yes. Yes, she breathed, and then his mouth was on hers, the kiss desperate and gentle and full of months of restrained wanting finally allowed to surface. They broke apart breathless, foreheads pressed together, both laughing slightly at the intensity of it. "We should tell people," Lucian said. "Make it official. Get married quickly before you change your mind."
"I'm not changing my mind." Eliza stepped back, smoothing her hair with shaking hands. "But we should do it properly."
Announce it, let people adjust, have an actual wedding instead of rushing into something that looks like we're ashamed.
"I could never be ashamed of you." "I know, but I need this." She met his eyes. "I need to stand in front of everyone who said I was ruined and show them I'm not. I need to prove that my life isn't over because I refuse to accept their version of happiness. I need them to see me choose this, choose you, choose us, not as a desperate last option, but as the life I actually want."
Understanding crossed his face. "Then we'll do it your way. A proper wedding. Invitation, ceremony, everything. Give society one more chance to judge you, and then show them exactly what they lost when they tried to break you." The announcement of their engagement sent shockwaves through both London and the local county. The reactions were predictably mixed: scandal, speculation, grudging approval, and in some circles, genuine happiness. Margaret wrote first, her letter full of tearful congratulations and relief that Eliza had found happiness. Their mother's response was more cautious, offering blessings while clearly uncertain whether to be pleased or horrified. Their father didn't write at all, but Aunt Catherine sent a letter that made Eliza laugh until she cried. "Well done, girl. You took everything they tried to use against you and turned it into armor. That Varick fellow sounds like he has sense enough to appreciate what he's getting. Don't let anyone make you small again. And if they try, tell them your mad aunt in Devon will come to London and make a scene that'll have them talking for decades." The wedding was set for late January, giving them time to plan something meaningful without the rush looking desperate. Eliza designed every detail with the same careful attention she'd given the estate improvements, not to impress society, but to reflect the truth of who she and Lucian actually were. The ceremony would be at Ashford's small chapel, the one on the grounds that hadn't been used in years. They'd have it restored, not to its former elaborate glory, but to something simpler, more honest. The tenants would be invited, along with select friends and family who'd actually supported them. London society could come if they wanted, but this wasn't for their benefit. 2 weeks before the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived at Ashford. Edmund Fairfax stood at the door, looking nothing like the confident man who'd married Margaret in secret. He was thinner, older, the marks of desperation and defeat carved into his face. Mrs. Holloway tried to turn him away, but Eliza stopped her. "Let him in. I want to hear what he has to say." They met in the drawing room, Lucienne present as silent support. Edmund stood awkwardly, twisting his hat in his hands, unable to meet Eliza's eyes. "I'm leaving England," he said without preamble. "The creditors, the legal troubles. There's nothing left for me here. I'll be on a ship to America next week." "Good," Eliza said flatly. "You'll do less damage there." "I came to apologize." The words sounded forced, rehearsed. "For everything I did to you, the lies, the manipulation, trying to destroy your work here. I was desperate and angry, and you decided to take it out on me because I was an easy target." Eliza's voice was calm, almost detached. "You wanted me to be the villain in your story, so you didn't have to acknowledge that you were the villain in everyone else's." Edmund flinched. "I never meant for things to go so far. You never wanted to be held accountable. That's different from not wanting to cause harm." She stood, moving to the window, looking out at the estate she'd helped save. "I used to think you destroyed me that day in the chapel, that watching you marry my sister broke something fundamental inside me. But you didn't destroy me, Edmund. You freed me." "Freed you?" "From the fantasy I'd built around you, from the idea that my worth was determined by whether you chose me, from a life that would have slowly suffocated me while I pretended to be happy." She turned back to face him. "So thank you, actually. Betraying me was the best thing you ever did for me." Edmund's face crumpled slightly. He'd come looking for forgiveness, for absolution, for something to ease his guilt. He wasn't going to get it. "I hope America treats you better than England did," Eliza said, not unkindly. "I hope you learn to be honest there, but I don't forgive you, and I don't wish you well. I'm simply indifferent to your existence. That's all you get from me." He left without another word,
and Eliza watched from the window as his hired coach disappeared down the drive. "That must have been difficult," Lucien said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "It was easier than I expected. He doesn't matter anymore. He hasn't mattered for months." She leaned against Lucien's shoulder. "I used to think closure meant confrontation, apologies, some kind of dramatic reckoning. But real closure is just indifference. Moving forward so completely that the past becomes irrelevant." The wedding day dawned cold and clear, winter sunlight turning the frost-covered grounds into something magical. Eliza dressed in her room, Margaret helping with the buttons, the two of them moving carefully around their shared history. "You look beautiful," Margaret said softly. "Happy. Really happy, not just performing it." "I am happy." Eliza studied her reflection. The dress was simple, cream silk without excessive decoration, elegant but not ostentatious. Her hair was pinned back simply, a few curls escaping to frame her face. She looked like herself, not some idealized version of a bride. "Are you all right? Being here, helping me after everything. I'm where I should be, supporting my sister on her wedding day." Margaret's eyes were bright with tears. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Stop." Eliza turned to face her. "You made mistakes. So did I. We both let Edmund manipulate us because we were looking for something that wasn't real. But we survived. We're here. That's what matters." Margaret hugged her fiercely, and Eliza hugged back, feeling years of complicated resentment and love finally settling into something simpler. Not perfect reconciliation, their relationship would never be what it was before, but acceptance. The chapel was full when she arrived. Tenants and their families filled most of the pews, dressed in their best clothes, faces bright with genuine joy. A few London society members had made the journey, curiosity bringing them where approval might not have. Aunt Catherine sat in the front row looking imperious and pleased, and at the altar stood Lucien, watching her approach with an expression that made her breath catch. Not polite admiration, not performative romance, just open, honest love. The ceremony was brief and meaningful. They'd written their own vows, discarding the traditional promises in favor of something that reflected their actual partnership. "I promise to challenge you when you're wrong and support you when you're right," Eliza said, her voice steady. "I promise to build something with you, not just for you. I promise to be honest even when it's hard, and to trust even when I'm scared. I promise to face whatever comes next as your equal partner in everything. I promise to see you clearly, not as society defines you, but as you actually are," Lucien replied. "I promise to value your intelligence, your strength, your stubborn refusal to accept limitations. I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you, but beside you in everything. I promise to build a life with you that's ours, messy, imperfect, and entirely real." When they kissed, the chapel erupted in genuine applause and cheers, the tenants celebrating with an enthusiasm that London weddings rarely achieved. The celebration afterward was held in the main hall, transformed from the site of their desperate confrontation with creditors into something warm and welcoming. Mrs. Holloway had outdone herself with the food, plain fare made extraordinary through care and skill. Wine flowed freely, the tenants mixed with the few society guests, and the awkwardness lasted about 10 minutes before the shared joy of the occasion dissolved the artificial boundaries. Mr. Walsh stood to give a toast, his rough farmer's hands holding a glass carefully. Lord Varick and Lady Varick, still getting used to that, they gave us something more valuable than forgiveness of debt or capital for improvements. They gave us proof that we mattered, that our work had value, that we deserved better than we'd been getting. That's what I'll remember, long after the fish ponds and dairies are forgotten, that someone finally saw us as people worth investing in. Mrs. Fletcher followed, her voice thick with emotion. "Lady Varick taught me that asking for help isn't weakness and that women can be more than what society tells us we're allowed to be. She showed up every day and worked beside us, not above us. She's the reason my children will have a better future than I did. That's worth celebrating." More toasts followed, each one heartfelt and specific, until Eliza was fighting tears. These people, who'd been so broken, so suspicious, were claiming her as one of their own, not because of her title or her marriage, but because of the work she'd done and the respect she'd shown them. When the formal toasts ended and the music started, Lucien led her onto the makeshift dance floor.
They moved through a waltz with easy familiarity, the product of months of working in sync. "Having second thoughts yet?" he murmured. "Not even a little. You?" "Only about whether I deserve you." "We've been over this." "You do. I do. We chose each other, and that's enough." She smiled up at him. "Besides, we have work to do. 3 other estates have already written asking for consulting help. Apparently word is spreading about the mad Earl and his unconventional wife, who actually make failing estates profitable. Are you suggesting we turn our love story into a business opportunity?" "I'm suggesting we turn our skills into something bigger than just one estate. We proved it works here. Why not prove it everywhere?" He laughed, spinning her through a turn. "You're remarkable, do you know that?" "I'm just stubborn. There's a difference." "No, there isn't. Not with you." The celebration lasted long into the night, the formal structure dissolving into genuine joy. Eliza danced with tenants, with her brother Thomas, who'd made the journey from London, with Aunt Catherine, who was surprisingly graceful despite her age. She laughed until her face hurt, drank more wine than was probably wise, and felt lighter than she had in years. Late in the evening, she found herself standing on the terrace with Margaret, both of them wrapped in shawls against the cold, watching the lights from the hall spill across the frost-covered grounds. "Do you think about it?" Margaret asked quietly. "That day in the chapel. What would have happened if things had gone differently?" "Sometimes," Eliza admitted, "but not with regret. If you hadn't married Edmund, if I hadn't walked away, I wouldn't have found this. I wouldn't have become who I am now." "You would have been miserable with him." "I know, so would you." Eliza glanced at her sister. "Are you all right? Really all right?" "I'm getting there. It's hard, being separated, facing the gossip, but Aunt Louise is kind and Bath is quiet. I'm learning to be alone without feeling lonely." Margaret paused. "I think I might try to do something. Find work, maybe. Something useful." "You should. It helps." "Were you terrified when you first came here?" "Completely. But also excited. Like I was finally doing something instead of just waiting for life to happen to me." Eliza squeezed her sister's hand. "You'll find your version of that. Something that's yours, that makes you feel capable and strong. It won't look like mine, but it'll be just as real." They stood together in companionable silence, 2 sisters who'd taken very different paths through the same betrayal, both finding their way to something better. The months that followed were a whirlwind. 3 estates hired them for consultation, 2 in the Midlands and 1 in Scotland. Eliza and Lucian traveled together, assessing situations, designing improvement plans, training local managers in their methods. It was exhausting, exhilarating work, each estate presenting new challenges and opportunities. Their reputation grew. The Ashford method, people started calling it, tenant-focused management that prioritized sustainable improvements over short-term profit extraction. Other landowners were skeptical, but the results were undeniable. Estates that adopted their principles showed measurable improvement within months. Not everyone approved. Traditional landowners accused them of coddling tenants, of undermining the natural social order, of being dangerously radical. Eliza didn't care. She'd survived worse criticism. By spring, they'd helped transform 4 estates beyond Ashford. By summer, invitations were coming faster than they could accept them. By autumn, Lucien was being asked to speak at agricultural conferences, presenting their model to skeptical audiences who couldn't argue with the documented success. And through it all, Eliza and Lucien built their life together. Not the conventional aristocratic marriage of separate spheres and polite distance, but a genuine partnership where both contributed equally and both benefited from their shared work. They fought sometimes, loudly, about strategy, about priorities, about the best way to approach difficult problems. But they fought honestly, without manipulation or cruelty, and they always reconciled with deeper understanding of each other's perspectives. "We're going to be insufferable," Lucien said one evening, reviewing yet another request for consultation. "The couple who fixed their estate and now thinks they can fix everyone else's. We don't think we can fix everyone's. We know we can help the ones who are actually willing to try." Eliza marked 3 proposals as promising. "The difference matters. Does it bother you that some people still whisper about the scandal, about how we started? Not anymore. They can whisper all they want. I know the truth, you know the truth, and the people whose opinions actually matter know the truth. The rest is just noise." A year after their wedding, Eliza received an unexpected letter from her father. She almost didn't open it, old wounds still tender, but curiosity won out. Eliza, I was wrong about you. I said that to your mother months ago, but I should have said it to you directly. I thought you were being foolish, throwing away your chances for security and respectability. I didn't understand that you were building something more valuable than either. I've been reading about your work, the estates you've helped, the methods you've developed. Your mother showed me the letters from Margaret, describing how you helped her find employment as a teacher in Bath, how you encouraged her to rebuild her own life. You've become something I didn't think possible for a woman of your station. Truly independent, truly capable, truly powerful in ways that have nothing to do with marriage or male approval. I should have seen that potential in you years ago. I should have encouraged it instead of trying to make you fit a mold that was too small for who you actually are. I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, too. Your father, Eliza read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words. It wasn't a perfect apology. It still carried the weight of his assumptions about women's limitations. But it was honest. He was trying, in his own awkward way, to bridge the gap between them. She wrote back that evening, accepting his apology while gently challenging his remaining prejudices. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a door opening where one had been firmly closed. The second winter at Ashford brought its own challenges. One of the tenant businesses failed despite their best efforts, forcing difficult conversations about what success actually meant and whether every failure was preventable. They lost a major investor when the stock market crashed, requiring creative refinancing to maintain operations. Eliza dealt with a difficult pregnancy scare that turned out to be just stress and exhaustion, but forced them both to confront questions about family and future they'd been avoiding. Through it all, they adapted. Some of their methods needed refinement. Some of their assumptions proved wrong. But the core principle held. Treat people with dignity, invest in sustainable improvements, build partnerships instead of extracting resources. By their second anniversary, Ashford was fully transformed. The estate not only survived, but thrived, generating enough profit to fund continued improvements and support a comfortable life for everyone connected to it. More importantly, it had become a model, proof that estates could be profitable without exploiting tenants, that innovation and tradition could coexist, that treating workers as partners instead of resources benefited everyone. The celebration was smaller than the wedding, just the Ashford community, close friends, and family who'd proven themselves worth including. They gathered in the restored main hall, the same space where Eliza had once faced down creditors with nothing but determination and spreadsheets. Mrs. Holloway presented them with a gift from the tenants, a painting of the estate, commissioned from a local artist, showing the grounds in full spring bloom with all the improvements visible. In the corner, nearly hidden, was a small figure of a woman in practical clothes, working in the garden beside the tenants. "So you'll remember where you started," Mrs. Holloway said gruffly. "And where you brought us all." Eliza studied the painting, emotions too complicated to name flooding through her. 2 years ago, she'd been broken, humiliated, certain her life was over. Now she stood in a room full of people who respected her, loved her, valued her for exactly who she was. "Thank you," she managed, "for giving me a chance to prove myself, for trusting me when you had every reason not to, for becoming more than just tenants and employer, for becoming friends." Later, when the celebration had wound down and most guests had departed, Eliza and Lucien stood in the estate office looking at the ledgers that documented their transformation. 2 years of entries, from desperate negotiations to sustainable profits, the story of their success written in numbers and notes. "Do you ever miss it?" Lucien asked suddenly. "London, society, the life you left behind? Never. Not even a little." She closed the ledger, turning to face him. That life was waiting, Lucien, waiting for permission, waiting to be chosen, waiting for someone else to determine my worth. This life is doing, building, choosing for myself what I want and going after it. Even when it's hard? Especially when it's hard. The difficulty means it matters. It means I'm living, not just performing existence for an audience. She moved into his arms, feeling the solid warmth of him. "I wouldn't trade this for anything. Not respectability, not an easier path, not the approval of people who matter less than they think they do." "Good. Because I'm fairly certain we're about to make things harder." She pulled back, studying his face. "What do you mean?" I've been offered a position, advisory role with the Agricultural Reform Society, helping develop tenant-friendly policies for estate management across the country. It would mean more travel, more public visibility, more criticism from people who hate change. Also more opportunity to actually change things on a large scale instead of one estate at a time. Yes, but it's your decision too. This affects both of us, our work here, everything we've built. Eliza considered. More travel meant less time at Ashford, though the estate was stable enough now to handle their absence. More visibility meant more scrutiny, but they'd survived that before. The opportunity to influence policy, to spread their model beyond individual estates to systemic change, that was worth almost any risk. We should do it, she said firmly. We proved it works here. Now we prove it works everywhere. You're sure? I'm sure that sitting still and protecting what we have is the beginning of stagnation. I'm sure that we didn't do all this work just to maintain one successful estate, and I'm sure that facing challenges together is better than avoiding them separately. She smiled up at him. Besides, when have we ever chosen the easy path? Never. It's one of the things I love about you. One of many things, I hope. So many things I've lost count. They kissed, and it still felt like the first time, full of promise and possibility and the thrill of choosing each other again and again. The announcement of Lucien's appointment came the following month, accompanied by the inevitable commentary. Some praised the choice, some condemned it as radical and dangerous, some dismissed them both as idealistic fools who'd gotten lucky with one estate and would fail spectacularly when attempting broader reform. Eliza read the criticisms with detached amusement. They'd said the same things when she'd first arrived at Ashford. They'd been wrong then too. The work began immediately. Drafting policy proposals, presenting to skeptical committees, negotiating with landowners who saw any change as threat. It was frustrating, exhausting work, progress measured in inches rather than miles. But slowly, minds began to change. The success of Ashford and the other estates they'd helped couldn't be dismissed. The documented evidence of improved profits, reduced tenant complaints, and sustainable management practices spoke louder than ideology. Within a year, several of their proposals had been adopted as recommended practices. Within 2 years, estate management curricula at universities began incorporating their methods. Within 3 years, the Ashford method had become standard terminology in agricultural reform circles. And through it all, Eliza remained visible, not as Lucien's wife supporting her husband's work, but as equal partner and co-creator of the model. She gave lectures, wrote articles, consulted with landowners directly. She refused to be sidelined or dismissed as merely decorative, and gradually, grudgingly, the men who dominated agricultural policy learned to take her seriously. It wasn't perfect. There were still men who refused to work with her, still women who thought she was betraying her gender by being too ambitious. Still moments when she wanted to scream with frustration at the stupidity of resistance to obviously beneficial change. But she persisted. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. 5 years after that day in the chapel when her old life had shattered, Eliza stood on a stage in London, addressing a conference of landowners and estate managers. The room was full of skeptical faces, men who thought they knew better, who resented being lectured by a woman, who came hoping to find flaws in her arguments. She didn't care. "I'm here to talk about profit," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the large hall. "Not sentiment, not charity, not radical social reform, though we'll get to those too. I'm here to talk about money, because that's what most of you actually care about." The room stirred, attention caught by her bluntness. 5 years ago, Ashford Estate was 3 months from complete collapse. Debt-ridden, tenant relations destroyed, income barely covering basic operations. Today, it's one of the most profitable estates in the region, with a waiting list of people wanting to lease tenant farms. She pulled out documents, holding them up. These are the numbers, verified by independent accountants. Profit increased by 300%. Tenant satisfaction up 90%. Property values doubled. This isn't theory, it's documented success. She walked them through the method, the tenant partnerships, the investment in sustainable improvements, the long-term thinking that prioritized stable growth over short-term extraction. She showed case studies from other estates, each one backing up her claims with hard data. "Some of you are thinking this sounds too good to be true," she continued, "that there must be a catch, a hidden cost, some reason why this wouldn't work on your estates. And you're right, there is a cost. The cost is your willingness to see tenants as partners rather than resources to be exploited. The cost is patience while improvements develop. The cost is treating people with dignity and respect instead of viewing them as interchangeable labor. She paused, letting that sink in. If that cost is too high for you, then this method won't work. Not because it's flawed, but because it requires you to change your fundamental assumptions about how estates should function. It requires you to admit that the old ways, the ways that led to tenant revolts, to failing harvests, to estates crumbling into debt, were wrong. The room was completely silent now, every eye on her. I was told I was wrong about everything, she said quietly. Wrong to refuse a conventional marriage. Wrong to work on an estate. Wrong to think I could manage anything more complicated than a household. Wrong to believe tenants were capable of innovation and growth. I was called scandalous, unfeminine, dangerous. And maybe I am all those things. But I'm also successful. My methods work. The proof is undeniable. She held up the documents again. So the question isn't whether this model is viable. The numbers already answer that. The question is whether you're brave enough to try something that requires you to change. Whether you're willing to prioritize long-term success over short-term comfort. Whether you're secure enough in your own worth to treat others as equals instead of subordinates. She set down the documents and looked out at the sea of faces. I know some of you won't try. You'll dismiss this as unrealistic or unsuited to your circumstances. That's fine, but others will. And their estates will prosper while yours struggle. Their tenants will be loyal and productive while yours remain resentful and barely functional. And eventually you'll realize that the cost of not changing is higher than the cost of adaptation. She stepped back from the podium. Questions? The room erupted. Some hostile, some curious, some genuinely engaged with the ideas. Eliza answered each one honestly, neither defensive nor aggressive, simply presenting evidence and logic until even the most skeptical had to acknowledge the validity of her points. When the session ended, dozens of people approached her, some to argue, some to request consultation, some to simply shake her hand and say they'd never heard anyone speak so bluntly about estate management's fundamental problems. Lucien found her afterward, pride written across his face. You terrified half that room. Good. They needed terrifying, too comfortable with failure. And inspired the other half. Also good. She gathered her papers, exhausted but satisfied. How many consultation requests? 43 so far and still counting. We'll need to hire help, build a proper consulting practice instead of just the two of us traveling constantly. Already working on it. I've been talking to some of the more successful tenant managers about joining us, bringing their expertise to other estates. They walked out of the conference hall together into London's bustling streets. The city looked different to Eliza now, not the site of her humiliation, but just another place where work needed doing. Do you ever wonder what Edmund thinks? Lucien asked as they climbed into their hired coach. Seeing your success, knowing he's somewhere in America probably still drowning in his own failures. No, Eliza said simply. I genuinely don't think about him anymore. He's irrelevant to my life. He has been for years. That must feel good. Complete indifference. It feels like freedom. The coach rolled through London's streets, taking them to the hotel where they'd stay before returning to Ashford. Eliza watched the city pass, thinking about how far she'd come from that desperate woman who'd stood in a chapel doorway watching her life collapse. That version of herself seemed like a stranger now, someone who'd wasted years waiting, who'd shaped herself to please others, who'd believed her worth was determined by whether someone else chose her. She'd been so wrong about everything. Her worth came from what she built, from the work she did, from the respect she earned through competence and dedication. It came from choosing herself first, from refusing to accept limitations that others tried to impose, from being brave enough to walk away from what wasn't working and build something better. What are you thinking about? Lucien asked, watching her face. That I'm glad everything fell apart the way it did. That if I could go back and change things, prevent the betrayal, avoid the humiliation, I wouldn't. Because that path led here, to this life, to you, to work that actually matters. You don't regret the pain? I regret wasting 7 years waiting for someone who wasn't worth it. But the pain after, the rebuilding, that made me who I am. I wouldn't trade that for anything. He took her hand, threading their fingers together. You're remarkable, do you know that? You keep saying that. I keep telling you I'm just stubborn. Those are the same thing, at least with you. They returned to Ashford the following day, and it felt like coming home. Not because the estate was perfect, it still had challenges, still required constant work, still frustrated them regularly. But because it was theirs, they'd saved it together, built it together, created something that reflected who they actually were rather than who others expected them to be. The tenants gathered to welcome them back, eager to share progress on various projects. Mrs. Fletcher's dairy had expanded again. Mr. Walsh was training 2 apprentices in fish farming. The inn had received recognition in a travel guide. The brewery had won an award at a regional fair. Each success was small on its own, but together they painted a picture of transformation, not just of an estate, but of an entire community finding its potential. That evening, Eliza and Lucian walked the grounds together, following the paths she'd first cleared years ago when she'd been running from grief and anger. The gardens were thriving now, a mix of useful and beautiful, practical and aesthetic. The cottages glowed with warm light. The sound of children playing echoed across the valley. "Do you think we've done enough?" Eliza asked suddenly. "Changed enough things? Helped enough people?" "Enough for what?" "Enough to justify everything that happened. Enough to make the pain worth it." Lucien stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Eliza, you don't have to justify your existence through accomplishment. You don't have to earn the right to have survived betrayal. You just have to live, fully, honestly, as yourself. Everything else is extra. But the work matters. Helping people matters. Yes, it does. But not because you owe the universe some kind of debt for surviving. It matters because you're capable of it, and you choose to do it. There's a difference between proving yourself and living authentically. You spent too many years doing the first. Make sure you spend the rest of your life doing the second." She absorbed this, feeling something settle in her chest. He was right. She'd been so focused on proving she wasn't what Edmund and Margaret and society said she was that she'd almost forgotten to just be. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too, for exactly who you are, not for what you accomplish or prove or overcome, just you." They stood together as the sun set, painting the valley in shades of gold and orange, watching the life they'd built continue around them. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was real and honest and entirely theirs. And that was more than enough. Years later, when someone would ask Eliza Thornbridge Varick about that day in the chapel, the day her carefully constructed life had shattered, she would smile and say simply, "That was the day I stopped waiting for someone to give me permission to live. That was the day I learned that the worst thing that can happen isn't public humiliation or betrayal or losing everything you thought you wanted. The worst thing is wasting your life being small because you're too afraid to take up space." I'm grateful, actually, for the pain, for the betrayal, for the forced rebuilding, because it taught me that I was capable of so much more than I'd ever imagined. And she was.